Yeah. Oh, Gary's not here, so we don't have any markers. So, give me a couple characteristics of God.
Merciful. First one that we think of.
Thank you.
Loving.
Just. Whoa. Sovereign.
Holy.
How long do we have?
That's plenty.
Judging.
Judging, give me a couple things Vista's doing well as a local church under merciful, loving, just, sovereign, holy God.
You want us to be as quick?
If you could scrape the bottom of the barrel and come up with anything even remotely close to what Vista's doing well, that'd be great.
It's worshipful.
Relationships, we're worshipful.
I didn't want to say missional.
Well, you know.
Then give us a little bit of time to think.
Melinda said teaching.
Teaching.
Thanks.
Gotcha.
Okay, good enough. And where do we need to improve? Same ones?
All of the above.
Yeah. Worshipfully, missionally. Okay, let's pray about all that stuff.
God, you know that we can come to you this morning, Lord, with all of who we are and what we have done this morning, last night, yesterday, whatever. Lord, with a clean slate because of your mercy. Father, we know that that your love has covered us, Lord, that your grace covers us all the time. It is, Lord, sometimes, never do I ever understand your grace. Lord, never can I ever grasp really the weight of what you've done. But I know that I am thankful for it. Lord, it is the heart of you, Lord, to love the people that you created. It's the heart of you to be one with the people you created, and I, for one, come to you, Lord, as a sinner and a beggar, and just ask that every day, Lord, and know that is true because of your Son. So thank you for that. That even in all of my mess, even in all of my brokenness and my sadness, my grief, my sin, Lord, that you love me as your daughter. Father, that I am a child of your kingdom. That you have given me that honor, that you have bestowed that on me, Lord, and I am definitely thankful, but oftentimes very confused why me?
And I just thank you for your presence here. I just thank you that you are always present, even though we get up in the morning and we're tired and we have trouble. And you're putting the next foot in front of each other, that you are present. You never leave us, you never slip. Thank you that you love us unconditionally. Want us to build body through you with each other. You are all about relationships, not only with people, but other believers and non-believers. Please pray that you would continue to stir our hearts towards you. Help us to we tend to focus on 98% of the time behind this. And let's keep our eyes on you.
Lord, I thank you that we can be a community that rejoices together, share a sorrow together. That you, because you're about relationships, because you are all of these things, you hold us in either space, and you help us hold one another in your space. So I ask you to be with Sean and Bethany as they are rejoicing, and also thank you that Lonnie's here. She's going through, Lord. That we share these things, bear one another's burdens, and share each other's joys. And that's only because of the God that you are, Lord.
God, we're eternally grateful that you've given us ears to hear you and your call, and your whisper, your truth. There's so many in the world that cannot at this point hear for some reason, either because of your sovereignty or their own sin at this point, God. You have graciously allowed us the privilege of getting a glimpse of you, getting a sense of you, and knowing your Son, and experiencing your Spirit that testifies within our soul that you are. There may be nothing that we should or could be more thankful for in this lifetime than opportunity to acknowledge, know, praise, sacrifice for you, our Creator. This morning is just another example of an attempt by us to posture to be able to serve you. Thank you for these friends, these leaders. Pray that you would fill them in the unique and special ways that not only you can, but the way they lead. Peter, his sickness this morning, God, I appreciate his perseverance, God. I pray that you give him a burst today, God, as a result of his faithfulness. God, you would lift him, carry him. I so appreciate when leaders put themselves in a position to need you. It is a definition in many ways of leadership. And thankful for him. And I would suspect that everybody in this room has laid something aside, needs you in some way, God. Thank you for that posture. I pray for them, ask you to meet them. Eternally grateful, God, for Gary and Sydney. The detailed, consistent, disciplined work they do to help develop leaders here at Vista and in their own other spheres. It's a great and awesome thing that they do for your kingdom. Not enough people notice. I do. You do. Some do, God. We're thankful for that. For these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Good morning. Lonnie, I haven't seen you. It's good to see you. Feeling better, Melinda?
Yes.
Kinda?
Yeah.
You were under the weather too, huh? Jan, talking a little. I really, it roses me out, right? It makes me feel like we just live in a petri dish, right? We're just all swimming in the same stuff, you know?
For all the germaphobes, just
Pretend like they're not there.
I remember sitting in a class in college once and it was like silent and the teacher was the only one speaking and you could just hear sniffle, cough,
Oh
sniffle,
my
sneeze, and
gosh.
I'm just like,
I'm gonna run out.
what's happening?
Hey, I wanted to show you a couple models. Systems might be a better choice of word there. That we use to guide some of what we do, and then we're going to go through. This is kind of fun. We've compiled over the years just case studies, things that we've had to deal with and run into, questions that have come up, and it's just fun to kick them around and say, okay, what would you do in this situation? And as you can imagine, they're not clean, easy. Some things are easy, some things aren't. Before I get started here, did you have opening anything? Did you have stuff in your mind you need to unload first? Any kind of sin in your life? Use some house cleaning.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I was just looking to see whether we needed another, can I hear him off here?
Chase,
You project his voice.
I'll project.
Like a good Shakespearean
Yes,
actor.
I'll do it. The first one I want to show is relatively simple. I didn't invent it. What I call the development cycle.
No, I'm saying, does that fit?
Probably not.
Oh, move that over to the center, we might. Or we can move it.
There we go.
Development cycle. You may have heard me tell the story before, but I started at Heritage, the church that planted Vista, in 99, April of 99. And we were about 300 at that time. And 8 years later, when we planted Vista, we were about 2,500. And so we had to learn pretty quickly that we were in a constant state of developing systems, people, over and over again, really. And at about the 1,500 point, I did, as you can imagine, when you're in a church of that size, there were only 2, 3, 4 of us on staff. You end up doing every single job you could possibly do. It's a great training ground for me as we grew, helping learn how to do church and how to lead people. And I ended up kind of hitting every job, and then we ended up setting ourselves up in a senior pastor, executive pastor role. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but one is a straight line where you have a senior pastor and then you have the executive pastor, and that's the only relationship that the senior pastor has organizationally. So everything goes through the executive pastor, and so as you can imagine, as we grew, the span of control under me got pretty broad. And it got to the point where it was too much, so we decided to break that executive pastor role into two, where we had a ministries pastor and an operational pastor. So this was sort of the ministry side of the house, women's ministry and men's ministries and care ministry, and there was probably 7 or 8. And then the ops side had we had administration stuff, we had facility stuff, we had finance was under there. Okay, so what happened was, we were fortunate to have a guy in our church who was the C, he was a C something O. I think he was the COO, the Chief Operational Officer at Nationwide. He was in our church. He was one of the top 10 COOs in the nation. He was pretty well sought after, and Nationwide was undergoing some topside renovation, and he didn't want to stick around, and those guys can be control freaks. He didn't want to stick around and somebody else let him go because they're bringing in guys, and he decided to leave. So he took 6 months to find his next job, which ended up being with Microsoft. So while he was in his 6 months off, he served as our operations pastor, so he was pretty good at it. And I would have been, and realized I was pretty horrible at it, in retrospect, by comparison. So we shared the same office. He went from some office in the sky to a little junior executive desk and a little phone in my office, and it was just like crazy. Really humble guy, actually. I got, Peter, like that kind of an education, you're going to spend 6 months with some guy at that level, it's going to cost you $250,000 probably to get that kind of education. And that's what I got for free right there. But I'll never forget this one meeting I had with our children's pastor at the time. And we met for a couple hours, and he was unloading all of his organizational problems and things like that, and I was helping him. So maybe it wasn't 2 hours, it probably wasn't. It seemed like 2 hours, but it was a long meeting, and we worked through and fixed a lot of stuff. And he walks out of the room, and George was in there the whole time. He walks out of the room, and I look over, and George's going. I was like, what are you doing? He goes, that would have been like a 5-minute meeting for me. And I was, okay, tell me what's going on. And for the next, really, couple months, George showed me why he was so good at what he did. And it was, he was an expert at developing people. Actually, I'll get back out. I'm going to hold off on that. I boiled it down to a couple things. First of all, you have to, I don't have typical words that I use for that. You have to define the problem. There's always a problem, right? There's always a problem. I had and my favorite illustration for this is a scene from The Patriot. You've seen that movie? Patriot.
It's just on you.
Was it just on again? Yeah. My favorite scene is where his oldest son gets taken by the British, and then he and his younger sons go to ambush that group of people, and he's got basically probably an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old son, and they each have muskets, and he puts them on the hill, and then some of his final instructions to them are, he says, first of all, you remember how to identify the officers, right? So I want you to shoot first, shoot them first. But then he says, remember what I taught you, and the little boy says, aim small, miss small. So you aim small, you miss small. If you first of all, you aim at nothing, you hit it, right? You hit nothing. If you aim at too much, it's hard to hit what you need to, but if you can really define what it is you're trying to do, I find this to be one of the most significant helps, not only in my own personal life of getting things done, but helping others, is defining the problem down to a very small thing. And here's the reality. When people come to you with a problem, I find people are very poor at this. They don't know what the problem is. They think they know what the problem is, but they don't know what the problem is. People take a very quick guess at what's wrong, which comes through their own grid, their own stuff. People don't research. There's a lot of ways to define, so I'm not going to go into in great detail, but think of some ways that you can help understand the problem is to, right, you do some research in that area, you talk to some other people, you get some other angles. There's lots of ways to do it, but you got to define the problem. Here's an example. A life group leader come to us and say, our life group is cheesy. And so there's a problem right there, right off the bat. It's like, okay, I'm not even sure what that means. What does cheesy mean? You could assume you know what that means. So you got to dig into even some words. Say, okay, what does that mean? They had already come to the conclusion that the reason it was cheesy was X, Y, Z. Okay, this is why cheesy. And as we talked through it and we worked through it, that person, unbeknownst to them, they had an agenda. They wanted to change something about the way we do life groups. And so their solution, in one sense, was to say, well, it's not good, so we want to change this. And you work all the way back and help, a lot of times, help a person understand, okay, here's what the real problem is. Okay, so the reason George said it would only be a 10-minute meeting or 5-minute meeting is if someone walks into their office, you're going to say to them, what's the problem? And they're going to say what it is. And, you know, typically, if they're coming to you because they have a problem, you're where you are in that organization, or you're coming because you are better at it. Like, I've done that job, right? I've done that job. So I say to him, well, I don't know if that's your problem, right? I need you to refine that. We need to know exactly what the problem is. So go and, you know, do some research on this, talk to some other people, find out, and then come back. Maybe it is, but I'll see you next week, right? That's the way it went. Okay, so that person comes back next week, and they say, I have the problem, and then there's another 5-minute meeting, right? And what's this? Do you have any idea what this next thing would be? What's the next question? The first question here is, all right, what's the problem? And you're refining the problem. The next one is, you would think it'd be, what's the solution? Right? But the real question is, what are your 3 solutions? So you say, and this George, like I said, he's one of those high-powered, you know, fast burner guys. He says, no one comes into my office and says I have a problem and doesn't have 3 solutions. You can do that once, and you're fired. You know, at that level, you can't be a person that just says, I have a problem. So he says, I want them to come in with 3 solutions, at least. I prefer if they come in with 5. One of them is why we would do nothing about this problem. Don't forget that one. You may be best to do nothing, and then remember to get my solution. Make sure that one's in your 3 solutions. This is maybe the hardest of all the development, because as difficult as it is to define a problem, it's even more difficult to find the right solution, because we come at those problems with all of our own ideas, right, of what it is. And so this is where there's quite a bit of research that needs to go into and finding best practices elsewhere, and you develop 3 solutions. And then what's the 4th one? It's closely associated with that one. It's pick your solution. This was really crazy. That says pick your solution, by the way. This was really interesting. Development. Okay, and then the last one, I'll tell you this one first. This one is it's a combination of monitor, progress, and correct course. Right? Because you have a solution and you expect it to do something, but it may not. And if it's not, you want to quickly, you know, get back around here and redo that. Okay, so here's one of the problems with development. The leader quickly says, oh, here's your problem. This is what I did with the children's. Let me help you with that problem. And then let me tell you what the solution is, because I've learned this 1,000 times. And then, so is this person being developed if I'm doing that? That's where it breaks down. Why George was so good at this stuff was two things. One, he allowed time and space for people to learn the process of development. And this is really good in any arena. This is even good in your own personal life. Helping someone grow in a particular area. It's not necessarily about getting something done. What's really great about this for us is we're always worried and concerned about and focused on people changing not only their the way who they are, right? Like just developing it, but developing that heart. And so whenever we're working on some problem, whether it's, pick one, a church problem, right? Something in your ministry area. The other thing to remember is we really, not as a first priority, are we interested in getting that particular thing done. That we come into the situation with the idea that God is wanting to develop our heart, our character, and our ability, and the depth of who we are. So the first mistake we would make is to think that what we're trying to do is get that done, rather than remember that no, God is looking to develop people and to develop heart. Because the other thing that you run into as you allow someone to, press into things, because here's the other thing. Sometimes the problem is them. They have it's pretty easy. Someone may say, oh, we have a problem in X area, and the solution is for me to take over. That's a big extreme example, but like someone's looking for their own significance in ministry, and it's not uncommon to find a problem actually being them or somebody they're working with. Right? The problem is so often it's just relational. It's that we're sideways. When you realize that, now there's a development cycle for that as well. We already know some of the solutions for heart issues, forgiveness, right? Keeping short accounts, deferring to one another, settling disputes being graceful, right? And it's like, wow, people are like, oh, well, I just really want to deal with the problem. So again, remember, there's always two things going on here. There's the thing we're trying to accomplish, and then there's heart issues. So remember, this is important for us. We're really in a development. We're about as a church is development, about transformation of heart, about seeing people grow. So this is important. One thing I wanted to say here, and then I'll move on, is this just blew my mind. One thing that is imperative in development is failure.
Fail fast.
Huh?
Fail fast.
Fail fast, right? Fail fast. But fail. There's got to be room for failure. This was the hardest thing for George to get across to his CEOs. Because it actually costs money to fail. When you allow someone to pick a solution that you know, and he knew, and you will know, it isn't going to work. But it's imperative that they go through that process in order to learn. Right? I remember, and this didn't go well, but when I was learning to fly, I had one instructor pilot that he could anticipate a poor maneuver or a bad decision in the cockpit. So we're in the cockpit together. I'm telling you, he would take the aircraft before I could make a mistake. Right? And that's not how I learn at all. How I learn is just, I need to make a mistake. I need to fail. That's how I get a grip on it. And so we're flying. I was in the T-30 at the time, which means he's back there and I'm up here in the front. And it's like, I have the aircraft. He's constantly taking the aircraft and finally I go, when I fly with you, I learn absolutely nothing. This is what I say to the intercom. Which translated into, well, you won't be flying this airplane the rest of the day. Literally no response to that. Total silence. And he did a nice little flight for an hour. And we landed, and he said, get out of my office, and it didn't go well. But my point was, right, he wasn't letting me fail. There were other instructor pilots that would let it start to go downhill and so on. And he'd say, okay, did you feel what happened? That it's important to let someone fail. Here's what blew my mind, just for your information. So George's budget, right, no, wait, let me go this different way. He wanted his CEO to let him have 1% of his budget for failures. Like, don't ride me for this 1%. I'm gonna waste, in one sense, that 1%, but I have to have money to fail in order to develop these people. If you don't give me that opportunity, if you have this super high bar for no failure, that means I have to do everything and we can't develop people. So here's why that was hard for this CEO. You're going to imagine why this is. George's budget was $400 million. That meant 1% of failures, $4 million wasted. That's pretty hard for a CEO to swallow. But George was like, it has to be that way. Until he could get a CEO to let him have this much failure. Otherwise, George was constantly off because things were failing. People can't realize this, that there's development going on. There's a lot of lessons in that for us. One thing, it does cost, at the very least, time for development. It takes a lot of time. If you're really committed to someone's development, then you're going to have to see things not get done as fast as you want. It's really hard to stay out of the way and allow people time to develop. And there's a lot of work that goes into that because it's not just you, there's a lot of other people that want things done, right? And they don't really care about the development of the person, they just don't want a mouse in kids' community, right? That's a problem at work, by the way. So.
It's a legit problem. Just gonna say.
Yeah, it's easy to find.
We have one at Cardinal.
Yeah, I mean.
At Cardinal,
They would solve the problem, but it doesn't.
but at Cardinal, you're not handing every single person that walks into your building mouse food to sprinkle around
That's true.
the building, so it gets a little worse. This is good, right? This is what George taught me, and I oftentimes forget it. It's very good to remember. Some people are good at different levels of this. You might not be good at helping to find a problem, and that's good to realize, so get some help helping to find problems. Some people are better at coming up with solutions. Some people are very good at monitoring and correcting course. Gary is super, super good right here. Once we decide where we're going, Gary does an excellent job of keeping people accountable to that and helping us stay on the course we want to be on. There's people that are really good at these things. Any questions or reactions to this at all? How do they do this at Cardinal? These kinds of things exist in big organizations, or big organizations don't become big organizations. Do you guys talk about this kind of thing a lot? Is it similar?
We have a lean journey. It's our favorite thing.
Lean?
You ever heard of Lean Six Sigma?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Well, not Lean Six, I've heard of Six Sigma,
Yeah,
that's,
that's what we do.
yeah,
It's like, that all the time for every,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Six Sigma's quality, right?
Yeah.
Quality control, is that, come up with, that's GM, is that Jack, what's his name?
Toyota.
Oh, way back there, he came up with that. It was that guy that consulted with Toyota back in the 60s. Started just-in-time management. You know his name. Anyway, so that's cool. Yeah, Six Sigma. It's called Lean Six Sigma now. I didn't think you could. Six Sigma
You know,
is,
Six Sigma still exists, but
there's a Lean Six Sigma.
Lean Six Sigma
Yeah.
philosophy now.
Wow, that's a high power.
They're just
Okay.
saying words at this point.
So,
I work in academics.
anything?
I would say that one thing that we're working on in the church right now, and I can't get my arms around the problem, is middle school. Is the problem that we need something for the kids? Is the problem the parents? Are the problems what they're learning in their schools? Because they're learning a lot of crud, a lot of junk.
They're experiencing a lot of things that they didn't.
And they're experiencing a lot of things. So you're going, okay, what is the problem?
Yeah.
And that's, I've been,
You didn't mean the problem is the parents. You meant, is the problem that the parents need
yes.
class and instruction, not the parents were the problem?
Yeah, I'm almost.
Well, you don't want to rule anything out.
You need to define the problem, so.
Yeah.
It's really complicated when you start listening to like community pastors or Melinda, and you start going, wow, this is really complicated to define.
Yeah. I sat down with a bunch of high school parents within a year when we started Vista. And I won't go into detail, but they were wanting, they had a solution that they wanted to have implemented. And I didn't agree with that solution. It seemed like a solution that was just based on what we do and what we've always done in church. And so I sat down with them all and I basically said, what do you want? What's the end point here for your high school student? Right? They're involved at Vista for 4 years. What do you want? What do you want them to be when they leave for college? And they listed 4 things. And I said, does this solution do that? No.
I was going to say, one of the things we talk about a lot is benefits when we talk about solutions. Even if you put it in a church context, what's the benefit of forgiving somebody? What's the benefit of
That's good.
whatever, right? And it really helps, again, go to your point, look at, is it going to really solve the problem? So if somebody comes to me with a problem and a solution, I want to see what are the benefits they're getting out of it.
Yeah, that's great. There's like a little mini thing going on right here.
Yeah.
Who does it benefit? How does it benefit you? What good does it do?
Because ultimately,
Yeah.
I'll be honest, you don't want to fail once you've picked a solution. If possible, you actually want to fail fast between define problem and solution and have that iteration going on.
Yeah, I've written a 3-page paper on how to find a solution. It's really more of a paper on decision making. How do you make a decision? We mostly make decisions by intuition. So I think the solution is what feels like it should be, and so we're going to do that. It's like that plays a part. Intuition can be powerful, but there's so much more that goes in. And this is just one of those. That's a great element in the process of making a decision. There's probably a number of those. Like I said, this could go into much greater detail. The main things I want you to see is, and this is important, aim small, miss small. Whenever, as a leader, someone's bringing you a problem, you got to quickly realize there's a problem, right? Now, how do you know there's a problem? It's easy, right? But recognize, here's sometimes you miss it when there's just a lot of angst. People are either they're drawing conclusions or they're a little past this and they're making accusations about something. It's like, okay, whoa. What's the problem? You know about this is you know about the 5 whys? 5 whys? This is a consulting thing. It's not the whys. That's how you remember it. It's 5 whys. The consultants come in and they say, here's the problem, and they say, well, tell me what you do. And then they tell them what they do, and they say, so why do you do that? And then they tell them, they say, okay, well, why do you do that? Okay, well, this is because of this over here. Well, why did you start doing that? Until you get down, it's the same thing of defining the problem. You got to dig into things. Okay, why? Eventually, you will find, the ground somewhere. It's like me trying to. I told the story about that little tile that kept falling off in my shower. My whole house, I just kept gluing it on there. I didn't ask why. I was like, why is this falling off? I would have pulled it off, pulled a couple others saying, oh, the reason it's falling off is the wood behind this thing is rotting out. If I can fix the wood, I got to go, okay, why is the wood rotting out? And I dig one more level. I say, oh, there's a leak in my faucet. So if you just stay on the surface, you got to ask, you got to dig, you got to learn how to ask questions and get to the root of the thing and start dealing with the problem from the ground up. Sometimes you have to fix the foundation and not the cracked window. Well, we spend a lot of time fixing cracked windows, painting stuff, So learn to define the problem, learn how to develop multiple solutions and learn how to decide and pick good solutions, right? And then learn how to monitor and correct and keep this process going. Keep the heart in mind, right? Help people develop. Don't just aim for some, result out here, irrespective of any of that. Well, we got it done. Did anybody get better? Did anybody learn anything? Did anybody get closer to God? Did anybody learn about the weakness in their life? No, we got it done. It's not what we're trying to do. Yeah, good? All right. I get insecure when there's so much silence after this.
Can I tell a little story then?
Please, mate. So I thought you last night, or 2 nights ago, with Leighton Hewitt. He's Australian, sorry, but they call each other mate as well down there quite a bit. Everybody they were talking to, they were calling each other mate. I was like, I remember, Peter calls me mate. Anyway, mate, go ahead. I'm insecure if I was talking too much.
Did you just, that's on video, by the way, that you've just called me an Australian.
I didn't know. I didn't know.
That an Australian reminded you of an Englishman?
Yeah, but just the mate part. If I made a mistake and called you one of two things, an Australian or an American, which would be my better choice?
So let me tell you the
Okay.
story. So I worked in a Vietnamese refugee camp in Hong Kong, and had a maintenance guy who worked for me, and he came into my office, and he goes, I've got to leave. I was, why? He says, I've got to go to China. Why? It was, I can't be found. I've just got to get out of Hong Kong, got to get into China. I've got to get lost in China. I was like, why? Well, I got into a gambling debt. Okay, so what? He'd borrowed money. So he'd borrowed money to bet on horses, and he'd bet multiple times. He got himself into about $20,000 worth of debt. And he said, did you see the news the other day with the drug bust in the New Churches, place where we live? He says, yeah. And he said, that's the guy that I borrowed money from, and he wants the money back, and I don't have it. I've got to go to China. So he can't find me, so he won't kill me. And so we sat down and we started saying, well, what are some of the solutions? You could go to a bank. He says, well, no, I've already borrowed all my money that I can from a bank as well. So I said, well, do you want to tell your wife? Well, no, because that'll ruin the marriage. And I said, but you're talking about running away to China. We talked and talked and talked, and we came up with a solution. And ultimately, he actually finished the job. We got the money somehow for him, and he spent 2 years working in a taxi, 24 hours a day, living in the taxi. And he called me up after two years. Marriage is intact. He says, Peter, I've paid off my debt. And it was again digging into the problem, solutioning to make it holistic and practical. A bit of, obviously there's pain involved, but it was so much more than his solution of I need to leave and go to China tomorrow. And that's why this still applies into a very personal, real world. It's not just for big corporations at all.
Absolutely.
It's good.
Really good. Yeah, one of the things that I think of when you say that is the idea that for the most part, people are good. I find them to be good, and they want to do the right things. But in a situation like that, a person whose life is in danger, they're gripped by fear, don't even have the capacity to think of a good solution. Right? They're just doing what is instinctively required to survive. And without help, that might be their only solution, right? They might not have any other solutions. So, I mean, you can think of this as a harsh process, but I find that most people come into a situation interested in help, right? And it's a great coaching opportunity, it's a great leadership opportunity to help develop somebody. It's good to remember that people are generally wanting help, and in many cases fragile too, right? There's not a lot of people that have a great deal of confidence and are comfortable failing.
I have a question about that example. So we talked about the importance of failure and allowing people to fail. What do you do when the stakes are that high? Like if he had walked away from that conversation and said, no, my best solution is still to run away to China. would you let him do that, ruin his life and his marriage, and then come back, be like, well, that was the wrong decision, how do we develop me further? Like, how do you respond in that situation?
So you can never force anybody to do anything.
Right.
So if he'd have run away, he would have run away. And we would have probably had to take out and look after his wife, right? So for us, it was just sitting down and being very patient and just helping him get over the fact that his only solution was to run away, and to help him realize that there are people who love him, who support him, and if he was honest, then people would forgive him. But ultimately, if he decided to run, there's nothing I could do to stop him.
I think we go up against that with life support all the time. And for me, the thing that I keep saying in my head is we're responsible to, we're not responsible for. Because a lot of times people will come in and they'll want money for whatever, but that's not the problem. And you dig a little deeper and you dig a little deeper, and if they want to truly get help, then they'll keep in that process. If they don't, then we've done what we can for real solutions and real change. Where I struggle is, where is there a way to make small changes that don't 180 somebody? So for instance, like the parents of high schoolers, you know, they also are scared and in crisis, not knowing what to do about their kids. So a lot of their solutions would not solve the problem or not get the result that they want. But because we're about transformation, what can we do in small increments to get them there, instead of, can we give them a little bit of what they think they want and then move them a little farther, then give them a little bit more of what they think they want, so that eventually we'll get to the end goal? Because when you're dealing with something big like that, to go from one extreme to the other, sometimes will 180 somebody, you know, and then then they can't, you know.
I think there's another level in there too, that sometimes we think that we know the solution, but we really don't know the solution. And so you have to test some things out, or allow some things to be tested to see if that's the solution for that person, or, you know, but for me to sit and think that I've got the answer, I know what your solution is, and you got it wrong, is a little bit of a stretching my neck out a little far, I think. My sister-in-law deals with alcoholism, and we have given, it's hard to watch somebody go through something like that and not take the help that has been offered and offered and offered. And at some point you just have to step back and say, there's a possibility that the options that we have for her are not what she needs to get better. It may be that she has to completely fail. It may be that she has to, you know, find her own solution because she needs to do it for herself. We think we know, but it's a very prideful position for me to put myself in to say, I know what you need in order to get better. And yep, my solution will probably work, but not for everybody, and maybe that's not how she's going to get better. So then you have to allow the failure to happen, even if it could cost her her life, because there is no other way for her.
AA guys will always say, you need to bottom out. I remember trying to help this one gal, and I explained the situation to an AA guy, and he says, no one work. She hasn't bottomed out. She died. Because she had gone to all these different deals, and it wasn't the solution.
We have somebody in kids community on staff that's been working with us since the very beginning of this stuff. We've had multiple issues with her and her family, and even her and her job performance, And yearly, whoever has been involved in the leadership of kids community is like, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? What is, first of all, what's the problem? She's the problem, but yet not. And how do we love her and support her, yet protect our kids and support our families and move the organization forward? And literally since the beginning of this step. And then I was talking with somebody this week, and they're like, hey, did you know her husband just got saved? And I'm like, okay. Really? It pretty much was all worth it, when you think about it. And she's moving on. We wanted her to move on a long time ago, and we could have told her every reason why she wanted to, it would have been beneficial for her to move on. And then Melinda set up a thing for her, very loving, and very, this is what's gonna happen for you, because we're changing and you got stuff, and really had to mother her through that whole process. Her husband just got saved.
And she's developed.
And she's developed.
It's a beautiful thing.
But it was a pain.
Yeah,
It only took 9 years.
it's messy. All right, hey, let's, I've got some case studies here, but let's talk about some situations that have come up here and there. Try to start small, work out. Oh, these are small. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones. A life group leader, good life group leader, good life group, comes and says, we need to, I don't remember if it was, what's the policy on this, or we need to have you ask this couple not to be in our life group anymore. Because they're living together. They're living together now. So, what would you do with that? What kind of questions would you ask? This is a life group leader. He's been a good caretaker. I think he had any personal issues, wrapped up in it, but it was. He really needed. They needed to make this happen.
Why do they want them out?
Because they're living together.
Because they're living together. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a sin. And that's a sin. Yeah.
And nobody else in the group sins?
Right.
What's the end goal?
The end goal for him.
No, for the couple.
Yeah, they're going to get married. They're getting married in I guess it might have been 3 or 6 months from now.
How's the problem affecting the life of her?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was okay up to this point. They were kind of okay with it, but they started moving the group to different homes, and they were anticipating going to their home in 2 weeks, and their kids were asking about them.
Say that again.
The kids were saying, where are we going? Whose house? We're going to Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so's house this week? Or next? Or they were anticipating that. Maybe it hadn't quite pointed, but they were starting to anticipate, we're going to have to take the kids over there, and how are we going to explain? We were okay with it, but now we're going to take our children into it, and now we're going to have to explain
That they live together and aren't
that they
married.
live together and we're okay with it. So they were really feeling like, they probably felt like they had been doing wrong up to this point, they weren't addressing it.
Remember, Mike said this is one of the more simple ones.
Yeah, right. So it's good questions, right? They're gonna get married in about 6 months. What's the problem? The problem was they did not explain to their kids.
What would kicking them out accomplish? For
Uh,
them, not
For
for
the
the life group,
couple.
for the couple.
For the couple. I'll guess at that. I'll give you probably what's the standard answer is. It would force them to look at their life.
Realistically, though.
That should be the response of what people would say.
Well, it's just, I'll play the devil's advocate here. Sometimes you have to mix truth and grace, right? You can't just give them grace. You got to give them truth. And the truth is, you're living in sin, and the Bible says when you live in sin and you're not doing anything about them, we have to discipline you, right? We have to move you out of relationship in order to. You have to feel the reality here.
So has there been any conversation with this particular couple?
Great question. What are they saying about it?
Right.
Right.
What was the lead up to them moving in together? I mean,
What was the reason?
the reason, and I think you can sometimes see that coming based off of other lifestyle decisions, or maybe like where could we have started asking questions before now so that we didn't end up here?
Yeah, that's not a bad question. I would table that for a second because they're there
Right.
and they have to answer to the kids.
So the bigger problem really is not, like, is the life group leader, I guess, actually worried about the couple or themselves and their conversation at time?
That's a pretty hard one to decipher in most of our lives is how much are we concerned about me and how much are we concerned about them, right? That's a hard one to decipher. It's probably both. It's uncomfortable. If someone new comes to the life group, I have to explain why we're taught, So someone just asked have they talked to them? They hadn't, really. So that's where we ended the conversation. I said, why don't you talk to them? Let them know what's going on. And he asked a really good question before he left. He said, what should I tell them is going on? Like,
What should he tell?
Yeah,
the
when I
couple?
talk to them and I say, here's what's going on, what should I tell them? What would you, if you were that life group leader, where would you start that conversation?
I think I would start by asking questions on what their perspective is of their situation and how that lines up with their relationship with God and what
Yeah.
they know and believe about the Word of God.
Yeah, let me derail that direction by saying they're totally understand that it's fine. Just for the sake of argument. It's like, no, this is fine, we don't have a problem with that, which they wouldn't, they're not,
Right.
yeah.
What, the couple wouldn't have a problem with it? Because the couple still could have a problem with being out there doing it. They may
No, I'm
not.
just telling you, just for the sake of our argument, it's assumed for the moment that they're fine with
They're
it.
fine.
They're not, it's not gonna go down like this. Hey, you know about living together, and they're not gonna go, oh, we didn't realize that, so
Yeah.
we'll stop. That's okay, yeah, they just are, no, it's not an issue. That's part of the reason for church discipline, for moving someone, is to make them face, look, this is a different value system, and you're living outside the value system of God. You need to deal with that. That would be kind of the basic reason why you would ever practice church discipline. I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm just saying that's why it's there.
Because I don't think the sin is living together. That's not a problem.
The Bible doesn't say you can't live together?
No.
Yeah, not that I can find either. So,
Right.
yeah.
Let's get down to it. In the shower, they look and I was just gonna say, the issue between
between they all have to just be honest. I mean, what is a sin, what is not a sin, and then why it would be a problem for the families. And then how do they get around that?
Yeah. So what are you gonna tell the couple that's living together the problem is?
The problem, the way that I look at it is, yes, the couple has to define for themselves where they are and what their relationship is. But I'm obviously not, I'm kind of defining what I see as one problem.
Yeah.
Being that there's families in the life group that basically just don't want to deal with this issue.
Right.
And, with their children.
Right. And that's great. Let me cut you off there. And so what have they determined? This is an important part. That's the absolute truth, is that the people, so probably some people in the group, became uncomfortable with the situation. And what was their solution, how to deal with it?
Get rid of it.
Get rid of that.
So, and how?
Removing them from their life group.
Not quite.
Using the pastor to say, you've done wrong and you
Right.
can't do this.
They're
You need
looking
to
for one of, they're really looking for a policy. Right, this is a standard thing in the church that pushes us away from how development happens, is we set policies. We say, you can do this and you can't do that. So now, when something like this happens, there's a relational, we go to policy, because it makes it clean and really non-relational. All you gotta do now is you just gotta show them the policy. You just gotta say, here's the policy. Well, the pastor said, you can't. So now we're clean. We don't have to, it's not us. We would love for you to stay in the group. I mean, I'm just being extreme. But the policy is, if you're living together, you can't be a part of that group. Right? So but this is a big reason, side note, why we write as few policies as we possibly can. We really don't want policies to be the solution, even though there are a lot of policies that could drive you toward the right end point. Right? If we have all the right policies and we enforce them, everybody in our church will be married, not living together, and that are in groups. Right? Our groups would be awesome, right? They'd be perfect. There'd be nobody living together. There'd be nobody drinking. There'd be nobody doing, because of the policies say if you don't like it, you have to do this. You could have, everybody would be perfect.
You'd have no people in those groups.
So you would
have people.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, you wouldn't have any non-believers in the group, or you wouldn't have anybody, right, you'd have some liars in the group, right?
A lot of them.
A lot of them. Right, we understand this, right? So this is, you're getting to the root of it, right? So the first problem is you're trying to get me to solve your problem. You're looking for a policy to solve this thing, and that's not it. The problem is really what you started to tap on, right? What's the problem? Huh?
Families need to talk to their kids.
Yeah, the problem is the people that have a problem haven't talked to the people that are causing this open conversation. Right? So what you could do, you could take a policy approach to this. You could take the approach that church discipline has deteriorated down to, which is basically the execution of policies. If you look at a church's constitution, behind that constitution are an inch thick paper full of what are called bylaws, which are policies. And there's a problem in the church, you look it up, and here's what you do with it. And then you go through the process. Sometimes it's really rooted in relationship, but sometimes that's forgotten. There's usually a process that's oftentimes defined behind a policy. And it would, in a church, oftentimes say, get those two parties together. Get them to talk. But you got an arbitrator and the whole thing, and suddenly it's like you against me, and now I'm trying to win my argument. And now we're talking about whether we're going to change that policy or not, whether that policy is biblical, and what's biblical, and it's like, oh my gosh. Right, you just put everybody into the middle of a fight. Instead, say, okay, So I'm talking to the life group leader. What we need to do, again, it's not that they need to go talk to that person, right? It's that life group leader needs to get, right? The leader has not led in a biblical way, right? Now, to their credit, they have in a lot of spaces. This is a hard one, really hard one. And you can pick the, hot button issue of the day, that person that's in your group, and you think, how do I deal with this? So they go to the main, there was one couple that had the issue. But we'd already gotten that elevated to the life group once they did, the life group did. One couple, and I don't blame them, right? They're trying to do the right thing too. It's like this, you guys have been ignoring this, and now we're going over their house, and we're talking, because it's totally legit. There's no reason to demonize anybody in the process, right? So they go to that couple. Okay, you've been asked this, because this has been assumed, right? Is the couple that's living together believers? They weren't. They weren't, which is another big deal, right? Big deal. Massive. Okay, so Kyle goes back to, or said, goes back to the couple and says, there is no policy on this, which I helped him coach him through that. It's not like we don't have any beliefs about it. It's that there's policy that you need to talk to them about the situation. Okay, so this is going to blow your mind. So, and they have now defined the problem. We don't know what to tell our kids. So that couple gets together with a non-believing couple that's living together, and they say, "Here's what's going on."
The couple with,
the problem.
that has the problem.
Couple
They
that
say it, not
has the
the
problem with the life group leader. They go, they have
Okay.
dinner, or they do something, and they sit and they go, "Here's the problem. We're coming over to your house in 2 weeks, and we don't know what to tell our kids about whatever." And so, so this could go down by 100 different ways, right? It couldn't have gone down any better. This was so good. The couple says, "Oh, we had no idea. We're so sorry. We'll leave the life group until we get married." And then suddenly, it all becomes clear. They're like, well, we don't really want that. It's like they were just so sensitive. It was like, what? We had no idea what's going on. And I don't even remember now where it went from there. Honestly, I can't recall if, actually I know that couple came to faith eventually. They got married. I actually saw them at a church in Westerville a couple years ago. So I don't know how all that went down, but it just went in a totally different direction, right? But and the problem, you see all the lessons in that, right? It's just really it was really a beautiful thing. The worst possible thing could have been, oh yeah, they can't live together, and you get involved, and you say you can't do that, you got to go. And then what happens to that couple? They're angry, hurt. There's no more relationship, right? To me, the whole idea of church discipline, moving someone out of relationship in order to redeem them, there can ultimately be places where that's necessary, right? Particularly where harm of someone else is involved, right? That's an easy one. You're in together and it's like, oh, wait a minute, they're potentially harmful to someone. You might have to do some things. Cindy's got a good example, but there's always a far more relational process leading up to where you do that. And oftentimes, if you do that well, you don't end up having to separate relationally. There's some awesome things that can happen.
Wait, so the couple ended up just leaving the life group?
I can't remember.
Because I don't really, you said that was like the best solution, and I don't really know.
No,
if
No, the best possible solution was they.
Oh, the couple that had the issue?
No, the couple that was
No, the
living
best possible
together.
thing for someone bringing up an issue is someone's for that heart to be like,
Gotcha.
oh.
We didn't know.
Yeah, that's what I meant by the best
Yeah,
possible
okay,
way.
yeah.
Was for them to be like, oh, we're so sorry.
Yeah.
You know, it was best because it put it right back on the people with the issue were suddenly like, oh, They just said they want to leave. They want to go, and it's like, they started thinking, oh, then now they're just going to, they were like, oh, okay, that's not going to be that. So that was, that's because they were like, well, that's not how this should work. So I can't remember. I think they actually found some kind of middle ground, and we started talking about how to talk to your kids,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, that's.
right?
I was stuck on that one.
Right? They were sensitive. They were like, oh, we don't want to put you in that position. And all sorts of good stuff happened.
Okay.
All sorts of good stuff happened as a result of the way the non-believers responded to the issue. It's a good one. That is one of my favorites, because it had a happy ending.
Sad that it's the non-believers that respond appropriately.
Yeah, I'm looking at Jonah this week for the message. We're talking about the mission, being missional. It starts with the missional heart of God. And if you look at Jonah, God wants Jonah to go to the Ninevites, this wicked city. I mean, his heart is like, I need you to go to these lost people. And Jonah's like, the believer, the prophet, the man of God's like, no way. So he goes the other direction, right? And there's all these situations. The sailors, for the most part, turn to God. The Ninevites do it immediately. Jonah, when the sailors say, when they finally figure out, you're the problem, you're the one running from your God, and you're telling us your God's the one in charge of water and land, he's the one stirring up this storm, and they say, what's the solution? And he says, you got to throw me overboard. And they're like, okay, we're not going to do that. A bunch of pagans are like, oh, we're not going to do that. They're trying to row back, and it's like they're behaving better than he was, right? They're like, oh, we don't want to kill you. It's fascinating how often we get it backwards as Christians, and I think it oftentimes comes back to this whole policy issue. Right? We want policies. We want this do-don't. We want this Old Testament Mosaic approach to life and to God. And Jesus says love. Right? Find a way to love. Okay, here's the next one. So I travel to Africa, and I'm introduced to this tribe in Tanzania, which is south of Kenya, that has known about Jesus for 3 years. No prior knowledge at all. It's fascinating. Did you run into people groups in China probably all the time like that, right?
What do you mean?
People groups that had no knowledge of Jesus. Or did you mostly urban Hong Kong?
I was urban.
In some of those sprawling countries, India, for example, it is not that hard to find with no clue whatsoever, even still today. So this was 2006. They'd only known about Jesus for 3 years. And I'm pretty sure there was a chief. Right, so I could tell you stories about how Jesus was introduced and how they responded to it and all that sort of thing. This isn't part of the case study, but one of the cool parts was it was the women, the older women, and the young and the teenagers that were coming to Christ. I think it was like 2 or 3 older women came to Christ first, and then they were leading the children, the young people to Christ. That's the way it was going down. The men didn't have anything to do with it. So it starts to really catch fire with the young students, and they finally have an elder meeting, and they say, we've got to stop it. We've got to stop this. So they decide to put a line in the sand with their students. They're talking teenagers. And they tell the teenagers they have 2 choices, blood or water. Either you choose to stay with the tribe's values, and walk away from Jesus, God, this whole thing, or you have to leave. You have to leave the tribe. That's your choice. Again, probably why the chief was the chief. He steps in and he says, what do you think the most, do you have any idea what the chief interjects here? He says it's a bad idea. Do you have any idea why?
You're gonna lose the whole generation.
We're going to lose the whole generation. So he says, if we do this, we're going to cease to exist. we can't just do that. It was really cool. So the chief actually was there when they told us that story. There were two of us that were visiting this tribe. And it was really interesting. The chief we were about the same age, I think, at the time, both about 40. Just a really, really interesting situation. He lived in a mud hut with a satellite dish. I think either the chief or one of the elders ended up. It was one of the elders of the tribe. Ends up coming to Christ, and he has 7 wives.
Good evening.
Right. So what do you do? And they had, I'm pretty sure they had a biblical understanding of monogamy. It was like, this is what it was. So he's an elder of the tribe, he'd become a believer, and they were going to make him an elder of the church. That's what it was. You're making him out that he was probably one of the few men, and he was an older guy, and so they wanted to make him an elder of a church, and they were saying, we can't, he's got 7 wives. So he can only be married to 1 wife. So what do you do?
Are the wives saved?
I don't know. Probably, let's say half of them.
I only ask that because isn't there, I don't know the reference, but isn't there a scripture that if one comes to know the Lord, you are to remain in whatever situation you're in until the end / hopefully they come to know Christ?
Right.
I mean, I don't know what you do once they all know Christ, but.
Yeah.
Besides, you're throwing an awful lot of women on the street. I mean, that's
Right. Women making this decision is entirely different than men making it.
Well, he has a responsibility to those 7 women.
Because
That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to remain in the definition of what.
Yeah.
They could be living together, but.
As long as it's taking care of those women.
Right.
But not knowing the cultural background, I would also have to start asking questions to see how he valued women and does he know he has that responsibility to those 7 women? Because is it a situation where women are property like they used to be? Or is it, hey, do you understand that you've made this promise to these 7 women and you now have that responsibility to them? Do you know that you have that responsibility?
It's really hard to see things culturally through our eyes.
Right.
I mean, because obviously we are of one culture and they are of a different culture, so.
Yeah.
I don't know, what.
So can you biblically make him an elder?
What are the biblical requirements?
There requirements?
Of 1 wife.
Of 1 wife.
Of 1 wife.
It does say that?
Yeah.
Yes, husband and 1 wife. I don't know.
Put him on a rotating basis. 1 wife per month. How do you resolve that? Do you?
Making the community pass.
What are your options? Because we don't have standards for that.
You just make him, like, no, he doesn't have to have a title, but he can be seen as whatever role is, he's gonna play. He's the only man who's stepping up. I don't think giving him a title is necessarily, I mean, it could be.
So we could do the job but not have.
No, not do the job, just be.
I was offered that opportunity one time. My wife was doing all this work in the church, and we were hiring, we were going to hire someone in that space, and they wanted to hire me, but have her do the job because they couldn't have women in that role.
I'm not saying
I know
you're
you're not. I'm
I'm
just saying
saying he is what he is.
He's what he is.
Yeah.
He's gonna be a
He's gonna
Christian
be
elder,
An
right?
advisor of
Yeah,
sorts.
okay, so we got that. He's definitely gonna be wise
Advisor
and
to the board, yes.
further along, but they can't put him on the governance. They can't make him on part of the governance. Can he, can they?
So who's they?
The church. The church was trying to decide who are gonna be our identified official elders. It's an interesting question though, because this was one thing we loved about this particular organization. Well, I can't remember who it was. What I remember was that what they called their exploratory evangelistic mission teams, they call them TIMOs, T-I-M-O. I don't remember what that stood for. But they had this beautiful, we've learned a lot about missions over the last 50 years, as Americans particularly. Our missionaries used to go and put in place Western churches. They learned a lot about this, and what they did was they went in, they very clearly stated, we're here with this Bible. We want you to understand what this is and what it's about. And as you progress in this whole thing, I'm not saying what they would say, but this was the idea, right? God's going to direct and move in that church to build something. And they were there to help them put in place what God led them to build, as opposed to, here's what it looks like to be a church, and so now start to operate like this. They did a great job of just coming in and basically teaching them how to be attentive to God, how to be attentive to the needs of others, what the Bible teaches, and then as structures became. So what I can't remember is, like, it's an interesting question, our whole governance structure, right? Like, what is that about? Right? Why do we even have it? What if there's a guy in the church that is older and wiser, and people go to him for, and they had women, elders in their tribe out there. So there was more than property definition there for sure. So yeah, there's all these issues like, okay, well, how do we shape our governance? Why do we even have to recognize? What if we just have that guy as the older, wiser guy? Right? There's that possibility. So they erred on the side of love with the women. That was the higher thing, was it? Even though the Bible teaches and the New Testament teaches monogamy, they didn't frame it up for this guy that he had to divorce his wives. There was a higher value. Okay, there's a commitment that's been made here. What is that woman? Where is she going to go? It's really very Old Testament. It's like, okay, you divorce 6 of those women, they're I don't know what you call that in the nicest way. It's like they're tainted, right? They're where are they going to go? Who's going to take care of them? They're divorced. So they erred on the side of love. And I think they even, I'm pretty sure they made him an elder. Okay, what's interesting about this though too is, where will they be 10 years from now? Right, so then I kind of pulled that framework to how we think about decisions that we make in our church. We haven't arrived, right? There are sinners that come to Christ that have stuff in their life, baggage in their life, consequences in their life. Because you have other choices, does that mean this person can't be a part of that somehow? Do you know what I'm saying? Do we make provisions for people to live with the consequences of the decisions the unbiblical decisions that they've made in their life? Does that mean that they now cannot serve in certain capacities because of the condition of...
Talking about decisions they made before they
Yeah.
came to Christ?
Yeah, right. Right. Is it a clean slate? Does that also include the consequences? You know what I'm saying? It's like, how do you make that decision?
We know that in my old church, like the church I went to after college was Baptist, very strict Baptist. And there was people there who, through their kids coming to youth group as high school kids, the parents ended up, we saw a lot of parents getting saved and coming back to church,
Yeah.
but some of them were divorced.
Yeah.
And they weren't allowed to become members of the church because they were divorced. course.
Yeah.
Baptist church, you can't.
Absolutely.
You have
Right.
member. But then they were allowed to serve in certain capacities, not other capacities, but they were never a full member, so they could never vote on anything.
Right.
And that was
Right.
rough to explain.
It's very strange,
Yeah.
right? I actually know of pastors who will not marry
Mhm.
those that have been divorced before. And there's a fantastic argument for that. For me, it's really not a hard argument to say, God sees you, once you're married, and you've made a vow to that person no matter what happens. If you remarry, you've really aborted the restoration process. What if you're, yeah, okay, so tangent, right? It's like, okay, but, so what do you do? I know pastors who will not marry folks that have been divorced, but they're allowed to be in the church and do whatever. It's almost like, okay, you can be in the church and you have to go to there and get married, and then you can come back to the church. And I think, well, really? Does that work that way? So you're free of the, you're not going to get called on the carpet in the day of judgment for having married divorce, but it was only for, but you're embracing it before and after. I think, okay, you're really exhibiting acceptance and love and all that stuff, but you're not doing the thing. You didn't do the thing. You have to go somewhere else and do that. Wow. It's defendable.
I think, like what you're saying is back to the heart issue, though, is like, there are consequences to what you chose to do. I don't want to say in ignorance, but kind of, because if you don't know Christ, you don't know
Yeah.
the right or wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's not, you don't live up to biblical standards before you become a Christian, because it doesn't apply to your life.
Yeah.
But if that person gets saved and then is changing their heart, there's a difference between a person who doesn't see that there was anything wrong with the
Yeah.
past.
But even if you are, life's not black and white.
No, yeah.
And that's what grace is all about,
Right.
is that it is, there's just issues and things in life that happen, and God came and said, we got it,
Yeah.
you're clean.
Yeah. All right, so can we have a homosexual lead a life group?
These questions are really stressing me out.
That's funny. When Gary said the first one was the easiest.
Yeah, you thought the first one was hard. First
I
one,
would say yes.
you would say yes. So the argument for that, back to that though, is, okay, when you put someone in a leadership position, you're saying to the church, this person is biblically qualified for this, and they're not harboring any sin in their life.
You are saying that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, you're saying that because nobody's doing that.
Well, there are people doing it to the best of their ability.
But you don't think that person is? You don't think that person is?
Well, let's say that their view is that homosexuality is fine. It's okay. And let's just, for the sake of argument, say that we would disagree with that. So when you put someone in leadership, they have to meet certain standards. Because I'm just being the devil's advocate, because if you don't, then cut to the chase. If you don't, then you're just going to have a lot of sinners. Leading life groups and stuff. You have a line though, right? Well, it's okay, like, how about a pastor? See, there's a line, like, we're okay with certain things to certain, how do you draw those lines? Where do you figure out where those lines are? You have to draw the line. Don't just somewhere, and if you have to draw it somewhere, don't you draw it at the most extreme place and go, no. You can be here, and you can serve, and you can be a part of it, but you can't hold a position. What you have to say on that?
I don't know that you do. I think God will. I think that is the point of the whole thing, is that together where God will convict you of the things that he needs to convict you at in a timing that is right for you. And that will happen in a relationship, in a church, in, community where we are all seeking the same thing,
Right.
which is the truth of the word.
Right, so here's the kind of the problem with that. There's only two sides to this. I keep thinking the backside will be clean, no matter what.
Isn't there
No.
a rag here?
No, I got it.
No, I got an eraser.
I got an ink marker.
It's blue jeans. It's
Now,
cold out
wipe it
there.
on your jeans. There you go.
You're
Okay.
Can you just,
Can you put it in the center?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
So, some of this has to do, the issues that churches face with, they have to make this policy decision about whether or not they're going to allow homosexuals to hold certain positions, is for the most part, because they have an organization, big churches that have to make these decisions, rarely do small churches have to make it. Big churches with big staffs and lots of stuff, and there's an opening for a job right here. It's an opening for a job right here. And that job opening is actually public. So now the public can apply for that job. And if the church is big enough, the public is part of the church. Right? There's a crowd that's coming to church, they're not members yet, they're there, they're part of that. Some churches don't even have membership. Okay, so somebody is applying for that job. This is why there's a problem. This is why you have to make policies. Because what we're basically saying is, if you were the kind of person who grew up through a development process, right, and were discipled and were growing in your faith, what we're saying is this person's heart and character would be developed through this process, and we have a general idea what that would look like, and it would look kind of like this. So, if you're going to take that job, you have to meet the qualifications of a discipled, growing, spiritual, humble person, and if you live that way, you're going to live pretty much in the framework of the Bible. That's where God leads us. So you have to look like that. So you can see there's a big problem. There's a big problem with that, right? You're actually putting people in here that do fit a certain criteria, but they might not actually be that. They might not actually be mature. They might just have the framework. In my opinion, this is the worst possible way to fill that position. It's not even biblical. The church is built and it grows, not from the top down but from the bottom up. It grows because people are maturing, and people that are humble and they're turning their life over to God and they're recognizing their sin. What we have, I've said this before, right? God discriminates. God discriminates. You realize that? He discriminates against one group of people. The proud. Right? The humble will be exalted. The prideful will be cast out, right? Their own necks are going to become broken because of their arrogance, right? He does discriminate against the humble. I don't know how you can hire someone, the proud. I don't know how you can hire someone straight away there and really know whether or not they're qualified for that position. If being qualified for that position is a humble heart, that is proven character in the context of the body of the church. This is why multiplication is so terribly important to us. Is in order to be able to grow as a church, we do have to have organizational structure to it. But we cannot support the organizational structure if we're not seeing disciples made that can come and be a part of filling leadership roles. We always want so homosexuality to me is not a hard subject in terms of the mechanics of whether that's right or wrong. It's two things. One, it's a reality. It's a reality. There are people that are, I can say born gender confused, I don't necessarily mean from a DNA point of view, but generationally, in the context that they grow up from the very beginning, I can say that is going to exist more and more and more. You grow, we're raising children in gay homes. I don't know how there's any chance, in some sense, 2 or 3 generations down that road, how I'm not smart enough to talk about DNA, but or chromosomal things like that. But you're going to have people that are. It's reality. Okay, so there's people that are gay. Okay, is it an aberration? Is it out of alignment with God's creation? It most certainly is. It's like male sexuality, female sexuality literally doesn't fit, right? So it's not hard to see how if this is not quite right, at least not quite right. Somehow we have to live in that. We have to live in that space that it exists, right? So then the question becomes:
Gary feels much better.
does this need to be erased? No. Isn't that beautiful? This is our hiring structure.
I imagine that.
Yeah, this is not far from it. This is life, right? This is life.
Does anyone else see Mickey Mouse?
Yes.
Big nose. Yeah, so, okay, a little bit of a tangent. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question, because I think that there was an assumption there
Well,
that this person who's homosexual is,
Practicing?
practicing.
Right.
And I did not make that assumption.
Right.
Because I think
Yeah,
a lot of people have everyone
Yeah.
has stuff that they're dealing with, that they've even been convicted of, and know that it's not right, know what the Bible says
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's not something that you
Yeah.
just want to.
Yeah. The other thing that makes this hard is when it actually invades your own life, right? Like Bob Portman's a great example of that, right? He's adamantly opposed to gay marriage. Now he's a gay child and he's supportive. It's like, yeah,
Okay.
you know what I mean? Rob Portman.
Not Bob.
Who's Bob Portman?
Who's our senator?
Rob Portman. Yeah, he switched sides. He switched his moral views
Federal level, really.
because of his kids. It's like, yeah, that's what happens. It changes.
Not only that, but you have victims of abuse
Yeah,
who cannot enter into a relationship
right.
with someone of an opposite sex.
And that's
They
part
were
of-
abused by an opposite sex, so now you make them victims, you victimize them twice?
Yeah, that's part of it's real. It exists. We can't just pretend that it's a decision, a choice, a person can decide to go one way or the other. That's not always the case. The question isn't whether or not someone can fall quickly to one side of the line or another in any of our sin, any of our stuff. It's whether or not they are humble. That's the main question I ask a homosexual is there such a thing as sexual sin? Is there a line anywhere? As soon as you can get someone with sexual sin issues, whatever they are, to understand that there is sexual sin, now they're closer to evaluating their own heart, because then you have to ask, so is it possible that you are practicing sexual sin of some sort? The hardest thing is someone, and I don't even, we can talk about homosexuality, that is unwilling to evaluate their own heart and determine and be even open to the fact that I might be wrong. There's a lot of damage for why a person wouldn't do that. To admit that they're wrong, because part of the reason they're there is because they were beat across the head and shoulders physically, psychologically, emotionally their whole life, and they've been told they're wrong, and they finally got to a place where they feel like they're not wrong, and I'm okay for the first time in my life. That person is not going to comfortably come to the conclusion that there's something wrong with me, because they live with that monster, but if they can't get there, then we have a long, long way to go before they're going to be in any kind of leadership position, and it has nothing to do with the fact that they're homosexual. It means they're not actually dealing with reality yet. They're living in some kind of framework. I have a really good friend who's gay. We served together at our church in San Antonio. He was not practicing. He was wanted to be a pastor someday, He was trying to leave that part of his life behind. He was celibate. He assumed that because of other sorts of issues, that he just was never, he was just going to be single. He was gay. That was never going to change, but he wasn't going to practice that. He was going to be, like a priest. Just like, I'm not going to live that instead of my life. And then he met a girl, and they were great friends, and they decided to get married. And so we went through that process for a year. And really the question was for Susan, it was like, you're marrying a gay guy that doesn't find women attractive. She was an attractive gal. She's like, it's not about that. It's about our connection. We have intimacy on all these different levels and stuff. And so we married him, and I guess it was maybe 2 years later, Michael was pulling into his driveway, and there was a U-Haul pulling out, and she just left. He didn't even see it coming, probably for a number of reasons, but that he didn't see it coming, but she just left him. And that happened after I had left. That was in San Antonio. That happened after I had left San Antonio, so I wasn't a part of his life at that time, but I knew that it happened. And then he called me about 5 years later, and this was probably about 5 years ago. I remember right where I was sitting, I was in Panera over in Polaris, and I see Michael, and I hadn't talked to him for years, really. And he answers and he goes, Michael! I said, Michael, how you doing? He goes, I have good news. I have news. He said, I have news. I was like, oh. He goes, I'm married again. He's like, he's a wonderful guy. And he tells me about this 60-year-old guy that he's married to. He was 40 at the time. Maybe the guy was 57 or 58. It wasn't quite 60. And he said, Michael, he said, he called me Michael. He's the only person who called me Michael. Michael, it's so awesome. He goes, he's rich. He lives in this big house. And I get to, my friend was, you would not know he was gay. I don't mean to stereotype. He was, well, that's not even right to say. It's like, okay, so what I'm trying to say is, it was shocking. It was shocking to me. Let me tell you, it was shocking to me because he seemed so not gay in so many ways. But on the other way, the stereotype, he loved to throw parties. He loved to garden. I mean, and so this is what this guy really married him for, because he had to throw parties, and so Michael got to throw the parties. He got to decorate the house, and and he was in charge of the gardens around the house. It was so typical, right? So the only reason I tell you that is so Michael's telling me this, and I'm sitting in Panera. And this is what I said, and I'd seen Michael struggle to be single. And I seen him rejected by a woman. I seen him try. He seemed to be so unhappy, right? And I said, I'm probably not supposed to say this. That's exactly what I said. I'm probably not supposed to say this to you, but I'm so happy for you. I said, I'm so happy for you. You're happy. I'm not seeing you happy. He goes, yeah. He goes, I know. Because he knows what my position, if you want to call it that. And he goes, and I know, and I appreciate it, and that's why I called you. I wanted to tell you. I knew you would be happy for me. And then he went on to tell me, he said, I am, in my heart, Michael, I've looked at this, and in my conscience, I believe God is okay with me, the way I am, and in this relationship. He said, I also know there's a high probability that I'm wrong. And so I'm living in this space of, I'm not betraying my conscience, and God merciful to me if I'm wrong. And I don't even know how to argue with that. He is, and to illustrate in his life a great deal of humility. He didn't go into it lightly. He this is his interpretation before God, and he loves Jesus, and his life is changing, and it's like, wow. So did I say the right thing? Because Gary and I both have a friend who told us this story, whose longtime friend came out of the closet. Do you remember that guy's story, like where he was? Was he a part of the church? Was he a leader in the church? Who was the guy that
It was the guy that discipled.
the guy that was talking for us? Okay,
He
so here,
discipled him in a Christian college.
okay, so we led this guy to Christ, and the guy that was led to Christ was talking to us about his friend who came out of the closet. And what did he say here? It was very simple.
He didn't talk to him for
I
years
didn't talk to him for years.
because he was scared.
The guy didn't want to tell our
Didn't want to
friend
tell. Didn't want to
because
tell him.
he was afraid of how he would react.
Correct.
So he finally told him,
And he said, "What do you think? Do you think this is wrong?"
yeah,
Because he was
yeah,
gay.
yeah. And he
The
said,
answer basically was yes,
I said, yeah, it's wrong. And
and that closed.
And so now that relationship-
That was it. And so the friend was concerned about that and actually a bit mystified because he still saw him as a friend, but the other guy just closed him off. So he actually orchestrated a time to see him, but that I think that the relationship was just severed
yeah,
because of the answer. So like when you think about it from a biblical perspective, do you think it's wrong? And he said, yes.
yeah, it's wrong.
But what Mike's saying here is,
Well, let me stop you before you go any further. So who's right, me or our friend who said it was wrong? Or I said, I'm happy for you. What's assumed in that, for sure, Michael knows that I don't know if he would put the word wrong on it, but he knows that I don't support, really, in one sense, even him making that decision, but I was happy for him. So who's right?
No, it's a matter of who's right or wrong. I think who showed love in that moment, who chose love.
Well, let me put it this way, who loved better? I'll ask you that question if you want to. Who loves
Well, I
better?
think there's also two sides of that, right? Because you have the idea of your response is, this is my friend who I support, who I am seeing happy, and I'm going to choose right now to see his happiness and affirm that. And then you have, on the other side, this idea of this other guy who may have seen his response of you're wrong being a loving act to say like, hey, that's wrong, like let's turn back to God and like figure this one out, let's turn away from that. You know, in our context of what love is, your response was loving and the other man's was not.
It wasn't?
I would say no.
Would anybody disagree with
In a
that?
general sense, but I can see both sides of why what he did was loving.
It could have been loving for him to tell the truth.
But in my eyes, he didn't choose love, he chose truth.
Yeah, but you don't know that.
Right, 'cause
That's in
we're-
your eyes, right?
right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
We don't
from
know
the
whether-
assuming the cutting off of the relationship was the guy's fault who said you're living in sin, or however he said it.
Yeah,
I mean, he was asked point blank, do you
Yeah.
think this is biblically
Exactly right.
wrong?
Right.
I would absolutely, I've done this. I have
Yeah.
gay friends that live together. I recommended they moved in. Not together, but in my complex. I've told that story. But I've made it very clear because he's point blank asked me, do you believe this is wrong? Biblically, because he at the time claimed to be a believer, but
Yeah,
regardless, I said, well, yes, you know my position. That's not going to change because I care about you, and now I have to change my biblical beliefs because I'm confronted with life and it's messy. But I'm still going to love you and be friends with you.
yeah,
This doesn't change any of that for
Yeah,
me. But
right.
if you were asking my opinion on your lifestyle, yes, it's wrong.
yeah.
And I don't think that's unloving to tell someone that, because to me, loving someone is saying difficult things sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from the right posture.
Yeah,
Never just truth, no love.
yeah.
I think the key to that, though, is you're still their friend.
Right.
And that was our friend, the same thing. I mean, he literally engineered a meeting across the seat and just showed up. And he said, I still want to be your friend. Just because I told you truth
Yeah,
doesn't mean
right.
that I don't value our relationship, because I do.
Right.
And he went to great lengths to communicate that as
Yeah.
well as, because like you say, Jenna, he asked him point blank,
Yeah,
what do you think,
right.
what that says?
Does it matter if it's wrong?
To who? To who?
To anybody.
Well, why did he ask
To the
the
person asking
question?
the question?
In that particular case, I suppose it mattered because he asked.
Yeah,
Right. So it mattered to that person.
Yeah.
that asked.
And so then should the questions would be, well, why are you asking me that?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
why
there's
do
a
you
lot-
need me to affirm? What are you looking for here?
Okay, so let me go with that. We'll wrap it up because we need to. I'm going to use that as an example. There's three things that go into all these processes for us, okay? The first one is there is a process. There's always a process, and there's always some kind of relationship going on. It's very difficult to have any kind of conversation. It's very difficult to make any kind of progress if there is no relationship. And so we elevate the relationship over the issue. We don't ignore the issue, but we elevate the relationship over the issue. I would have suggested to our friend that a person who we haven't seen for quite a while, that is entrusting you with some information that's been hard for them to talk about, to elevate the relationship above the issue and to be to address those things first. This must be very hard for you. What's your life been like? Reestablish some relationship. I would ignore the question. If somebody say, is this right or wrong? I would say, I don't want to answer that right now. That's not the most important thing, right? There's wisdom in, okay, do we have the relationship to even talk about that, right? There's some deeper questions. Why are you asking me if this is right or wrong? Why is my view of, there's so many things that go into that you could move into, right? There's wisdom in, this person is looking for affirmation from me. Is there a way I can give them affirmation apart from this issue, right? You're unpacking, there's all kinds of baggage around that question. There's so much baggage around that question. Tell me I'm right. I'm questioning it myself. Tell me I'm not, I'm not, whatever. But you can't get to that stuff. You can't get to the deeper issues there without first elevating relationship, which is another way of saying love is first. Love is first. I was talking to Jed Deering yesterday. I had lunch with Jed Dye, and he works down in, is it Franklinton? He lives and works down there. He's becoming an Episcopalian priest over time because he just is one, and they're recognizing that he's working in that church. And there's a church that they coordinate with to do urban ministry, and this other church is adamantly opposed to the whole homosexual movement, and they make that very, very clear right out of the gates when they're ministering to someone. They pretty much cut the relationship off. And so Jed's talking to those people that work in that church, and he said, can I help you with this a little bit? Because when you don't love the homosexual, they're going to leave and come to our church because we love them. He's just saying, if you choose not to love them, they're just going to go up the street to us who love them. If you want to serve them, you have to love them, or we're going to be served. I mean, it was just like, he's like, you got to love them. If you don't love them, they're not going to stay. They're going to just come to us. They're going to come to the Episcopalian church that loves them. We elevate, always elevate love, always elevate relationship. And again, you talk this development cycle and that sort of thing. Can a person even handle the truth, really? Where they are right now, many people are in broken states. They've got stuff that is freaking them out. They're doing a very good job just surviving, right? And they're trying to take another step. Are we willing to walk with people for a while? Sometimes you have to slow them down. They may want to get to a certain point or have a certain answer. And you have to tactfully be able to say, look, let's just stay where we're at right now. Let's just relate. Let me say it. let me love you well. Okay, so the other thing is, so there's 3 circles, another Mickey Mouse, but I'm gonna do that. So, we want to love people above all else. Jesus says, look, all the commandments boil down to this. Anyway, you can, as a church and as people, you can get to where I want to get you if you love one another well, right? This comes first. It doesn't mean that we're not dealing with truth and issues and lines and principles and values and right and wrong. It just means that this has to be predominant. The other thing is, am I living honestly with God? Am I hearing from God? Am I understanding my own sin in my life? Is Jesus meeting me where I'm at? Have I prayed about this situation? Do I understand the best of my understanding? Have I talked to other people about how to engage this person right here? Am I really the right person to be interacting with this person? I think if you're not, if you're just, you've got your policies, you've got your stuff you're trying to get done, if you're trying to be the person who's the end-all be-all of the answers of questions, then you don't have any, you're wrong even being in there, in my opinion, right? Is God, are you following Jesus? Is God moving in your life? Is the Spirit alive and well in your heart? And if He is, you won't struggle with love. That's a big deal. You won't. You're truly following Jesus. You will not struggle with mercy and love and acceptance and truth and all that, and you will do it in the right, more in the right way and the right balance. Here's the other one. Are we trusting God in this person's life? This has become a big one for me. Can God, who changes a person's heart? It ain't me. I've tried. It does not work. It doesn't work. The church, oftentimes falls on the side of not really believing that God should change hearts. So we have to set policies and we have to put things in place and we have to demand that people live certain ways. Because if we don't do that, they'll never change. That's what we think. Tough love, man. If you don't administer tough love, if you don't put policies down, you don't discipline, you don't do, again, you don't hear me in extremes. There's always places for those things. But we tend to fly over into that space, I think predominantly because we don't trust that God can convict a person and change a person's heart. And I believe that God has a much better chance, if I'm erring anywhere, I'm erring in this, that I feel like God has a better chance if we do our part well. Now that's not true. God's not implicated or impeded, rather, by how well we do. But I sure think we can set this space up better, and here's why I would say that. People that don't know God or not walking with God base their understanding of who God is on us. So God does lose His opportunity because we're representing God, supposedly, and when we represent God poorly, when we're not loving, when we're not humble, when we're not being changed, this person looks here, they see us and our God, and they say, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want that. And so they don't even give God a chance. So we do give God a chance when we give God a chance in our life and in their life. And we have to trust that God is in charge of this development process, not us. That's why it's better for us to have a development process that is patient, that is not me-centered, like you were saying, Ann Michelle, it's not like my solutions. It's much better to be in that process with people and say, I don't know. Let's figure it out. Let's go to God together and figure out what He's saying to you and to me. And in love, let's together continue to pursue God and allow Him to change our heart and turn us into who I believe God can do that if we're operating in that space right there. So
Mike, I think for me, one of the things you said before was, when we've been talking about what do we do as an organization with these things, was we treat people as individuals. We don't treat them as groups.
Yeah.
So when somebody comes to us and says, what do you do about homosexuals? What do you do about teens? What do you do about divorce? The first thing we say is, well, who are you talking about?
Yeah.
And we get to the person.
Yeah.
Why are you asking the questions? We don't make generalizations of groups.
Yeah, and Todd Heath has said this and really basically taught me this principle. And the way he says it is, the New Testament does not allow us to judge groups. You can't judge groups. we judge in the fullest, best sense of that word, and engage individuals. Jesus engaged individuals.
So, the one question, and this is going off on maybe a different area, and we don't even, I know time-wise, Gary, but, as leadership in the church, you also have a responsibility to the church as a whole.
That's right.
So when you have these kind of situations, and I know this all started thinking, okay, would we allow any life group leader to be a homosexual?
Right.
So, and whether that answer is yes or no, but then dealing with the church as a whole, in this case, maybe Vista, and being able to support and being able to teach, and the principle here about we're dealing with individuals, I'm like, absolutely, but how do you get the church as a whole to buy into that, I guess, where they are not becoming judgmental and going, oh my gosh, we can't, getting the church as a whole to move away from the policy.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the church is specifically called out to be to speak the truth. And that's the role, that's one of the roles of the church. So it's like a very tricky, how do you do that, which you're called to do in a loving way. I found a lot of freedom in something that you just said. I want to make sure I got it right because I think it plays into this. That I find freedom in me not being the person to go into that situation because I don't have love in that situation. I have a friend right now who's really contemplating divorce, and I have one friend who comes at it from it's just wrong. From all accounts, the Bible just says it's wrong, and yeah, it is. But that doesn't sound, it's not loving to somebody who's in the middle of it, because it's just gray.
Right.
And I come from it from a very different perspective, and I think I'd go into that conversation and be like, hey, I don't know what to do. It's just tricky, it's just dicey. But because I've been there and I've been through it, I'm divorced, and I get to hang that badge of honor on my shoulders. And for me to go into some conversations that I know that I'm not loving in, I'm not going to do that well. But for it to be okay for me to nod into that conversation is so freeing. Whereas in the other situation, I belong in that because I will come at it from a loving perspective because I bear that one.
Yeah, there's two ways to look at that. One, there's a decision you're making. I think it's wise to go, am I going to be helpful in this? Can I be loving? Can I be open-minded? Can I elevate the relationship love issue here? There's that question. There's another question for the other person. There's this question about whether you actually have a relationship. This is a little pet peeve of mine. If that person cannot embrace my view, if we have to live together here, we don't have a relationship. If I can't say to you, like Michael, I can say to Michael, you're wrong. And he's okay with that because we have a relationship. If he's not okay, we don't have a relationship. I'm trying to embrace you, but you're rejecting me. I'm trying to be loving with your stuff and your position, your value, but you don't value mine. I don't know how to have a relationship with you, and that's one of the, just like I'm looking for, again, to single out the homosexual, I'm looking for someone who's humble. I'm not looking for a homosexual or non-homosexual. I'm looking for someone who's humble. I'm also looking for someone who is, I guess this goes along with humility, is able to live in a space where there are at least a variety of views on this, and we are all together trying to learn what's best. If you have to tell me, you have to change your whole view to mine, or you don't love me, I think, okay, we don't have a relationship. So there's two sides of that. It's good for you to analyze yours, but it's also good for you to check that other person and say, okay, you're asking me to come in here. Are you really asking me to come in here? Because we don't line up. If you're willing to invite me in and let me come in, and you can love me while I'm loving you, then we can maybe do something. Okay, we can take a break. Great questions. Awesome stuff. I got 10 more.
Cindy,
If anybody needs my,
All right, so you have in front of you what I have as your final draft, or a draft, or the first draft of your project.
Yep, sure do.
Hopefully you've been pursuing these things before now. I apologize to you in that this is our first year, so you were the guinea pig for this. The idea behind this was to get more measured and more strategic in how we do the VLR coaching, VLR leadership projects. So, timing has been atrocious. That's been my fault. It took us longer to connect with goals and objectives. It took us longer to connect with community pastors and site leadership to actually get this ball rolling. A lot of you have been doing this a while now. It's stuff you've already started. So we're going to go through, Gary and I are going to start meeting with you. Hopefully we're going to get in 2 meetings before VLR is done. Assessing now and assessing at the end of February some of these goals and objectives for you. What I found was that for a lot of you, the hardest part was making a goal and then making an objective that achieves that goal. So a little bit of news for me that some people writing goals and objectives is a different experience for them. Next year, I will be more on top of that because of some of the great ideas you all have shared with me. The other thing is on the bottom of your sheet where it says people I will be coaching. Those are not Gary and I. Those are actual leaders that you will be dealing with. So if the project is to be a leader of leaders, those are the people you will be working directly with. So for those of you that that we haven't connected in a while, I've written stuff on there, maybe it says how are you going to do this, if it's a goal that doesn't seem measurable, or an objective that doesn't seem measurable. Some of you I put who, or I put some ideas on there about the people you will actually be coaching, and so can we go around just a little bit and for you to say what your project is? You don't have to give all your goals and objectives, just so we know here what each other have been doing and are doing. Melinda, you want to start?
Sure. Mine is basically meeting with the current directors and finding an elementary director for Dublin. Do you want more?
an elementary director for Dublin.
Kids community. Yeah, kids community.
Mine is the Women of Hilliard. We're doing a women's tea. It's missional outreach. And our women together.
Would you say a missional tea?
Missional tea.
Missional tea.
Missional tea.
Love it.
Don't want to flip on that.
I don't either.
You're gonna get the red spoon, feel like some words, so we'll just add it.
Mine's the kids community coordinators at Dublin.
Mine is building a team for connections at Hilliard.
For what?
Building a team for connections at Hilliard.
Mine is shepherding families at Dublin.
Mine is the table.
Good
What's the table?
Oh, the table's an event for women, really to encourage and inspire them to seek their purpose, their story, their purpose here on earth for God, and then connect them to people that can help them do that. So creating on-ramps to discipleship, creating on-ramps to missional opportunities here in Columbus that people are already doing, just have to go be a part of it. I know your wife is like crazy busy, but you need to give her cookies and make sure that she grabs a friend and you babysit and she comes.
Right,
There's my
the coaching piece of that for Ann Michelle is the team that helps run the table. So she's an outside of Vista project. Devin, who is not here, is also an outside of Vista project. She, the high school leaders that she leads for Young Life is her deal on the project.
Where's Devin? She's at a
She is
weekend
at
with Young Life.
Yeah, she's
Young
at
Life.
Young Life thing. Go ahead, Jen.
My project is developing global partnerships at Worthington. Well, developing relationships with our already established global partners. That makes sense.
Mine is strategic leadership at Vista Worthington, which has included a lot of things, but kind of one of the big ones was identifying what Worthington's going to be doing for 40 days.
I set up and tear down Dublin.
Mr. Conlon?
I have something to do with Vista Global Community. I wish I could be more specific.
I was wondering how you were going to calculate that.
Jenna and Peter's kind of coincide because she's site-specific for Worthington and he's more global for global partnerships. So that's kind of fun.
That's great stuff, y'all. That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of variety, which was cool to see different spaces for people like
What's Jones?
John's is communications and social media at Worthington.
And Joel's?
Sean's is
Music.
Worship space?
right. No,
Singing.
You ever see all the worship leaders?
yeah, but it's more production. It's more production based than just worship leaders.
It's hard to describe, not the only member.
It's taken several.
Got it.
The people that he works with, a lot like Joel, he's targeting specific people that are on the production worship team, Sean is. Not necessarily, it's developing leaders, not necessarily people that are leading a group now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's, whereas Amy's would be working with leaders who are actually in the connection space and developing new people.
She's got, clearly has to
Sean's
fire
is-
some people.
There wasn't any other leaders
Right.
doing it.
Yeah,
But it's-
she had to find both.
Right, so hers is kind of a mix. There's some that she's working with and some that she's developing. Sean's, a lot of his is developing. Now, your projects will continue probably as long as you continue that relationship with your site. It's not that we're saying these have to end, but we are going to assess soon to get a line on what's going on now, and then we will assess at the end of February. So, yes.
I won't be here for the end of February. I will be back on the 29th.
Yeah.
How are you assessing or where?
Gary and I are going to meet, yeah. And I will be contacting those people that you write down in there, I will be contacting them. And I will be also asking your site leadership, whoever signed your thing. These are my copies, so if you need a copy, if you don't have this, then you can ask me for it, but I will get you a copy or email you a copy, but these are ours. So if you could pass those back, that'd be great.
My questions to you will be, who are your people? What are you doing with your people? How are you discipling your individual people? How are you growing them in Christ? How are you coming alongside? It may be that you need to remove those people from that position. That happens. How are you loving them through that process and then helping them to the next step? one of the problems with people getting a job in a church, they say, okay, no, I'm not gonna do that. Okay, so what are you gonna do now? What's God leading you to? You know, one of my little bugaboos about this, and I've never heard it in any other church, is I need to take a break. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I mean, I never once heard Paul say, I need to take a break. Now, I understand that there may be changes, but it's if you get out, what are you getting into? Because we got a job to do. But that's my little bugaboo.
That's your bugaboo.
It's a bugaboo for me.
Can you define that?
I know, I was just
Ray's got some good sayings, man, it's awesome.
Okay, Joyce is actually the only one that's been through this, so I may use her as an expert.
some cold pieces of paper.
Yeah, I know.
You want, this one has paper, this one, same.
If you didn't know this about me, I'm a tool person, and I like to use tools to train and tools to help people to think. And so these are pictures. And these are pictures about what we do in life groups. And even some of why we do life groups. So turn it over, and I would even recommend, I have a bunch of notes on my pictures because I'm using this as a training tool. I've probably trained, I don't know, 15 people on this, and I'll do another, as many as want to be trained, I'll do the same thing, and I refine this every time I do it. So look at the top page with the picture of Brazil with Jesus at the top. What does that picture say about what life groups are at Vista?
Are we supposed to write the answer down or?
No, you're supposed to tell me.
It could be different things to different people, right?
Oh, wow.
Shot down.
If we learn anything in Philon, it's that there's one right answer.
Always, and only ever. You're first.
God is
Good. This is simple.
God is big.
Look to Jesus.
Jesus.
It's Jesus.
Jesus is the king.
Jesus is King. Good.
Jesus wants to give you a hug.
I think it's important to understand when we go to a life group, this is all about Jesus. It's not, we do things socially, we come together, it's a bad day, but it's all about Jesus. It's the same thing of what this is all about. Jesus is here. So when Paul says, for me to live as Christ, and I'm giving you those verses there, you're gonna see verses. Very important that you understand. Mike was saying this the other day. We need to start with the Bible. We need to start with the Bible. Our authority is Jesus, our authority is God, but this is what he said. So when Paul says, for me to live as Christ, we don't doubt that, do we? I mean, everything he did was Christ. That's what a life group is. Okay? So there you'll see a verse on there, Philippians 1:21. Centrality of a life group is Jesus Christ. It's not you. It's not even the people. It's Jesus. Okay, what do you see in the second one? Go over to the right. What would that be?
Redemption.
Good. Is redemption? What else do you see?
Sacrifice.
Yep. It's really what I've put on this one is it's the gospel. It's the verse Philippians says, "For what I received, I passed on to you of first importance, that Jesus died according to our sins." This is first and foremost, that Jesus died for our sins. He substituted himself and he rose again. This is first and foremost. Now, do you know if everybody in your life group is a Christian? For sure. Slam dunk. No. One of the things that I was drilled on down at Spanish River is that whenever you get up front, whenever you get an opportunity to speak, why wouldn't you share the gospel? And so I went to David and I said, you know, you keep going over this. Jesus is God. He came to this earth. He lived a perfect life. He died on the cross. He substituted himself in our place. And he rose again. Why do you say that over and over and over? And that was his little motto. I mean, he changed it, but that's what he did. He said, Garrett, the power's in the gospel. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God that brings salvation. The power is not in Mike. The power is not in you. That's when Mike was saying, I can't change anybody. You can't make anybody a Christian. Now, here's my challenge to you. I was asking the staff, some of the people that came to my office, the staff mostly, I said, what are the 3 things that you would tell me, this is the best of Vista? And what are the 3 things that you would say are the worst of Vista? And I collected them all. And one particular person was telling me that they thought that we didn't articulate the gospel, I don't know whether it was enough or response and all that. I said, let me ask you a question. Do you do that in your life group? And they said, no. No. I believe, this is me, I'm going to agree, I believe that every week you get together in a life group, you need to communicate the gospel. I remember doing this with Tim Clark, and I was so proud of him. I mean, he'd pray the gospel in prayer, or he'd communicate the gospel, because we had at least 3 or 4 non-believers that we knew. And the assumption is, and we know at church there are a ton of non-believers. We know it. So why in the world wouldn't this be first and foremost in our heart? Okay, the next one. What do you see on the third one?
The Bible.
Well, but
You are sure. You are so sure.
Ask me what's underneath the Bible.
The Bible. What about the Bible? And how does that? What is it about the Bible that we tie into life groups?
Well, it's studying the Word.
Okay.
It's true.
It's true. What else?
God's Word.
Yeah. But what about the life group? Okay, we can say it's truth. All Scripture is given by the inspiration of God. It's profitable. And then there's another passage that's really, really important in a life group for Vista.
Do what it says.
There you go.
James 1:22.
There you go. See, she's been trained. This is really a big deal. We have structured our entire life group system around taking the proper Word of God, which our teachers teach us, and then don't just be hearers, but be doers. And so you've got a whole group of questions that are saying, what did generosity mean to you, and how are you applying it to your life as a result of Sunday? And how do you take that generosity and how do you apply that to your family? And how do you apply that to your kids? And how do you apply that to your life group? And that's why we do what we do, is that we take the Word of God, and I've never been in a church, by the way, that has done it this way. I've taught it, I've said there are churches that do this. And I was asking again, one of the staff people, and they say, one of the best things we do is take the Word of God and in life group, make sure that we apply it. It's one of the best things we do. We actually, and I think I probably said this, but we actually have done studies, they've done studies. They said, have you ever heard of a message on generosity? And like 2 days later, they say, no, I never heard that. And the pastor gave it that Sunday. Because they just heard it, and they forgot it. But what we're trying to do is take the Word of God and deal with it in our character, in our heart, in our transformation. If it isn't about transformation, then we're not really pleased with how this is going at Vista, because it's a transformational heart. So what do we do? What are the practical questions that we ask from Mike's message? So it's not just, thank you, Joyce, thank you for learning that one, I appreciate it. How about the next one?
Jesus lives in Phoenix, just like anywhere else.
Is he teaching at the Grand Canyon?
Phoenix is a state in the western part of the United States, Peter.
Thank
Phoenix
you.
is a state?
Oh.
Phoenix is a city.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I thought you were still trying to be funny.
I thought so too.
It's always different if I get a room in. Isn't it just change the whole
I'm
deal?
not helping my
Nah, you're doing great.
British friend at all with that geography lesson anyway.
All right, what do you see in that picture?
I see Jesus teaching.
Yeah. Yeah, it's discipleship. We need to not forget that that's what we're about. We're making disciples. In your coaching project, it's not a project, it's people. And how are we helping them in the transformation process? How are we helping them to grow in Christ? How have you grown in Christ in the last week? What is He teaching you? What is going on in your heart? That's what discipleship is, and that's what life group is. It's not just a meeting. It's not just we're just answering these questions because Vista tells us we have to answer these silly questions. It's not. It's life on a life. It's growing.
Can I interject something about that picture? One of the beautiful things about that picture for me is that everybody's looking to Jesus, everybody's listening to Jesus. We fall into that trap where Jesus disciples me and then I disciple other people. And it's me. I'm the leader of the life group. I certainly, but it's like to get everybody following Jesus, including yourself. You know, like who's leading that life group right there? Yeah, it's not a predominant. I mean, it's everybody, including the life group leaders, listening, trying to listen and understand Jesus.
And that's actually, having been a part of other churches, that's actually what we attempt to do at Vista. And Mike does this, well, I don't mean to toot his horn, but because of the way he's wired, he's pointing people to Jesus, not to himself. I've been with pastors where they're in love with the pastor. And when the pastor leaves, they didn't know Jesus. And so we're always trying to point people to Jesus. That's why you can go back to that first one. This is what it's all about. Skip the baseball diamond. I want to come back to that in a minute. But what do you see in the next one?
Risk.
Yeah.
That's good.
You see risk. What else?
I see people doing it together.
Yep. It's community. Yep.
Singing together, that's great.
Risking together. It is a risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have to remember that when we invite new people into our life. It's a risk just showing up. And we have to help them. We have to knock those barriers down. Can I pick you up? Hey, why don't we go get dinner before we go to the life group? But it's a risk. The point here is that I would, it's we are built for community. You cannot build a case outside of the Bible that I want to do this all by myself. I want to do this alone. The other thing is, in this particular picture, we need each other. We need each other. I so appreciate the way God designed the body, in that there's not one person who has all the gifts, and that we desperately need Jesus, and we desperately need each other with the gifts that Jesus, that God, the Holy Spirit has given to us. We're not as good without the body. So, well, I'm an introvert, so I don't need to have biblical community. Yes, you do. You can't build that. You can't. I mean, I know introverts that have, sometimes I've seen them have far better community. It may be smaller, but you can't build a case and say, I don't need each other. We don't need each other. Okay, how about the next one? Huh?
That goes to.
Absolutely. Generation. There's a great diversity. Psalm 139. God has uniquely created you. And what is the passage? It's right here.
13 and 14.
13 and 14.
Yeah. For you have created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. That's true for everybody in your life group. Everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're an extrovert. It doesn't matter whether you're an introvert. And here's another principle on this one. Everyone is welcome. No one is not welcome. Okay? One of my, and I've learned this since I've been here, we don't turn people away from our life group. We wouldn't turn them away from coming to church, would we? Everybody's welcome. Now, does that create a problem? Mm-hmm. It might. You might have 40 people in your life group, and you might just have to multiply or do something that people don't really want to do. Right? We're going to talk about multiplication at the very end of this too. How about the next one?
Gifts.
Gifts. Corinthians, all of these are one and the same. I love this verse. And the Holy Spirit distributed them to each one just as He determined. Not you, not me. The Holy Spirit said, Linda, this is what I want to give you, because you're special. Joel, these are the ones I want to give you. So everybody has a gift. I have a questionnaire that I'll share with you, and again, another tool. But I've asked life group leaders, do you know the gifts of your people? Do you know what they have an affinity toward? And how are you maximizing that in the life group? I was talking with somebody the other day, and I was given the illustration. Bill Hybels at Willow Creek Community Church went with a pastoral care guy to the hospital, and the pastoral care guy said, Bill, can we talk? I wouldn't go to the hospital again if I were you. You're really bad at it. In other words, there are some people in your life group that are going to take on the mantle of pastoral care. Does that have to be the leader or the facilitator? No. No. How do we help people? And we've got a tool, we got assessme.org, and if you need some help in that, Jan can help you with that, but it's like, it seems to be a pretty natural thing in life groups that we would know what God has made people good at and let them go. Right? Some people are hostesses and they got the gift of hospitality, and let them go. How about the next one? This is an interesting one.
Take time off.
Huh?
Take time off.
Take time off. What do you mean?
Vacation.
He wants to take a vacation.
Oh.
No, I mean take time out to focus on things which you probably don't focus on every day.
Okay.
Like, if there's some type of
Let's go.
intentionality.
Say it again?
There's intentionality, like there's a meeting date, there's a time that you get together. I don't know, that's what I'm saying.
Anything else?
Really, I see a deadline.
Joyce, do you remember this one?
No, I don't. I mean, I look at it and I think, schedule. You have a set time to get together.
Okay, Acts 2,
46?
46. How often did they get together?
Every day.
Every day. We cannot see that meeting as an end in itself. We are building community. I did a questionnaire one time for our life group, and I said something about how do you like how we get together in the meetings, and this one dear girl said, "This is what I hate about this group. I love you people. I want to see you more than just every once a week. We are building community. And it can't be just in a meeting. That's not the goal of community. What are the touches between the meeting? And when I ask this, a lot of guys will say, my wife's so good at this. I mean, I'm terrible at it, you know, but it just, as long as there are some touches. I was leading a group one time of about 14 couples. And I was doing Young Life, and I was traveling all the time, and all of these needs started to come up. You know, I lost my job, and I'm dying, and I'm going, okay, I'm done. I cannot meet those needs. I can't do it. And so I said, unless somebody's going to pick up the pastoral care mantle, I'm not doing this anymore. And one person did. Well, those were all the touches throughout the week, because we just found out about it, but you've got, okay, you got it. Why do we meet every other week in life group?
So we can do something missional on an off week.
So we can do something missional. What else would be another possibility on an off week?
Do something fun. Do something fun.
That's good. One of the designs is that we would also be able to have leadership community, and it wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I got life group every week and I got leadership community, and we're trying to be sensitive to the schedule. But the one that we probably do the least is the mission one. We just don't intentionally. I found that it was in theory here, but I didn't see it in practice. So is there a design once a month to do something? There's a life group over in Worthington, and they do it. They invite their neighbors, they have kids stuff, they do all kinds of stuff as an outreach. It's really cool. The other thing that I would just put in here when I'm looking at schedule, and you know that I'm schedule oriented, I'm sorry, it comes with the territory, but pay attention to the length of the meeting. There are people who are like me. I thought this went from 7 to 8:30. You just went from 7 to 9:15. I'm done. And people will quit because they're trend time. They're a trend event people. You can meet all night. Just close the meeting and meet all night. It's not a problem. Okay, turn the page. What's the next one? Jessica, you better get this one.
Kids
Kids! All right, let me give a little story. I think I'm right on this.
are welcome.
I think I'm right on this one, because I watch your Instagram. And
Gary's on Instagram, sorry.
every day.
But here's the
I want to know your
Every day. Is it the Hoffmans?
well,
And their kids?
there are a couple of sports.
There, if you see Jessica, you will see her with kids. She talks about how much she loves kids. Those kids are seeing Jesus. That's what they're seeing. Because she has such a love for kids. And it just, it oozes out. It's who she is. And those kids will never forget. They won't. I can remember people way back when I was really short. Shorter. Thank you.
Shorter.
Yeah, nobody else. Just you.
It's a hack.
Those kids need, and that's why we do what we do in kids community. That's why we have adults. I mean, it's the same thing. Now let me tell you a great idea that I learned from one of our life group leaders at Doug. I said, tell me about what you do, and I asked him about childcare. He said, you know what we do? We just, of our families, we just take a kid, one of our kids, and we just kind of highlight it, and everybody in the life group prays for that kid that week. And they may bring them up, and they may share something. Is that a good idea or what? That's a super idea. Okay, what do you see in the next one?
Care.
Care, pastoral care, priesthood of all believers. I love the story of Rick Warren. It's a large church out in California, and his secretary, administrative assistant, had said that somebody was at the hospital. He happened to know this person, so he went in, and the lady said, "You cannot go in there." "I'm the pastor," she said. "There's already 13 pastors over there." It's a great story. That's the life group. How about the next one?
You guys feel left out. Yeah, big way.
People of a certain color are not welcome.
He's having a bad day, he's great. He's not happy, he's in a winter season.
Yeah, he's in winter.
He's SAP.
He needs some oxygen.
He needs some oxygen.
God's designed it so we're never alone. And that's true for you as a leader too. That's why we do the, what principle? We have a principle that we follow with our leadership from Exodus 18.
The Jethro.
There you go, the Jethro principle.
For 1 second, can you explain that?
Yeah. Sure.
Because I don't know what that means.
The Jethro principle?
I do not know that.
Me neither.
Moses is. I don't think you told this to us last time either, Gary, so you can't ask me for this.
Now, we taught this in the coaching.
Yeah, it's in the coaching room. It's in the coaching room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
Whoops.
Maybe that's what it is. Oh, well, come on.
Jethro goes to Moses and he says, "Moses, what you're doing is not good. It's not working," because he was taking on all of the cases, all of the problems, all of the, he's doing it all himself. He said, you're gonna burn out. You're gonna kill yourself. You need to find leaders of 10s and 50s and 100s and thousands. Is this ringing true now?
Yeah, I'm remembering it.
Okay. Who's the most important person in this Vista?
My youngest daughter,
Jesus.
she thinks she is.
You're closest.
It's like
everyone.
We want to do everything we can to set up the individual, the person. And so these are the most valuable people in your life group, each person, each kid, everyone matters to God. And then X can go for like leader of 10. And then we may have, we got other life groups out here. And then we're going to give a coach, which is what you're doing right now, that you're working with leaders and caring for them. And then there's going to be a staff person down here that cares for, see how that works? So you're never alone. If you're a life group leader and you say, "Oh my gosh, I got a problem," okay, let's talk. We're in it with you, you know. And if we can't figure it out, we'll go to somebody else and try to figure it out. And so the Jethro principle is you're never alone. Okay, let's move on. What's the next one you see?
Open chair.
At least you got something out of coaching.
Good.
The empty or open chair.
It's a very comfortable office chair.
There's a very confused person looking at the shadows.
Yeah.
I love the passage of the lost coin and the lost sheep. I mean, if you leave the 99 and you go get that one because everybody matters, right? I'm going to give you this. I'm not going to walk you through it. It's something that Jen Arnold put together that I love. And I'll just give you one thing that I've discovered. As I ask people, I ask life group leaders, I say on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing in your life group worshipfully? How are you doing relationally? How are you doing missionally? And what I've discovered is that the missional one is really, really hard to define for people. Because there's a couple components to that. There's an individual component, and then there's a corporate. So you could say, well, I'm doing really good missionally because I've got the neighbor and I'm reaching out to them. Good. And you might share that and there'll be encouragement collectively. But then there are other missional opportunities where you might all go to the bridge. You might all go have a neighborhood deal. So there's a couple. So there's some good ideas in there. And the next one?
Your neighbors?
Yep. We have to keep going back to the well on this one. Because as I'm listening to, what do we call them? Community pastors, I keep hearing that people miss the people they're touching, that they're with, the neighborhood, the workforce. I keep hearing that we need to keep going back to that well, that is missional. I went to a group of guys one time, and they just had the hardest time defining missional because they were trying to like make it something other than just be Christ out there. The next one would be a corporate, going to the bridge, doing something together. The next picture is, here's what I want to paint you in the very last of these pictures. If Jesus is in your life group, could we take that verse that he will do far more than we would ever dare ask him? Is Jesus making a difference at Vista through your life group? I know the answer to that because I listen to a lot of people in our life group, and Jesus is making a difference. I mean, there are life groups, I think we mentioned this last week, there are life groups that are doing stuff that you go, Jesus made them do that one. They wouldn't be giving $3,000 of their money and not even, don't even tell them I gave it to you. There's a lot of stuff happening, and we know this. I try to fill in Mike as much as I can when I hear these stories. I've told this story, but it's such a great one, I'll tell it forever. And that is in 1948, the communists moved into China. And they kicked every clergy, and they kicked every missionary out of the country. And what happened to Christianity? It went underground and it grew. How did it do that? It did it through small groups. It did it, why? Because of small groups? No. Because of God. Because of Jesus. And he does do far more than we were ever dared ask him. And you look at that next picture. He takes the Red Sea and he opens it up. That's the God that's leading your life group. See, sometimes I think we should sell things too short. You've heard me, and I do it over and over again because I just don't get new mantras, but I've prayed many, many times, Jesus, thank you for being in this room. That's more important than anybody up here or anybody there. That Jesus is here. And he's doing things, and we need to, he's changing our hearts. Mike has said over and over, the reason that he gets encouraged by Vista is because he sees changed hearts. That's the goal. That's Jesus. That's not me.
Can I just share a story?
You may.
Which just has touched my heart in the last week. And a gal who actually is fairly new to Vista and is part of our life group. She also is part of the Bible study that I'm doing. And, I would say she's probably been around for a year and a half or whatever. And she came up to me last Sunday, I think it was, and she says, I have to tell you this story. So she started sharing with me about this story about a neighbor that they've lived on the same block like forever, like years and years, and this neighbor who lives next door, the house is in complete disarray, they never see, she doesn't talk to anybody or whatever. The neighborhood has named this lady the witch And this has been going on for like probably 20 years, 25 years, because, you know, she's reclusive or whatever. And she said, you know, different people in the neighborhood try to do things to get her to fix up her house or whatever, and she says, you know, she just is just a difficult person. And she said, this week I just been thinking that I need to change how I look at this lady. My heart needs to change. And I just went, oh my gosh, wow, she's hearing, you know, God is working on her heart. And I just said, that's awesome, I can't wait to hear the next story, you know? But, I mean, that's what, she never says anything in Bible study, rarely speaks a word. Life group rarely says anything, but she's obviously hearing.
That's cool.
And it's like sinking in.
Wow.
And it just is, it just made me, so it just thrilled my heart.
Yeah.
And I know, obviously,
Yeah,
you know, but
that's so good.
yeah. So she's looking for ways that she can now kind of maybe look at this lady, do something different.
Yeah.
You know, that's the Lord. I mean, we're not that sharp. You know, Zechariah, the last verse in here is, not by might, not by power, not by a great lesson, not by me being the neatest, you know, pastoral care and sharing my, not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit. So a question in your life group is, what is the Spirit doing here? And you begin to see, and it comes out and you go, where'd that come from? What's going on here? Anybody else have anything?
We're gonna talk about baseball diamond?
We're coming. James.
This is like the most exciting thing on the TV. I mean, yeah, power of the Holy Spirit, whatever. Jesus, whatever. Baseball.
Let's call it a baseball diamond.
But it is a baseball diamond.
Yeah,
So
softball,
like
it has
it's
grass in it. A softball diamond doesn't have grass.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, a baseball field has grass on the
Oh,
infield.
that makes me sad that you don't know that.
I didn't know that. Wait, really?
Yeah, I wouldn't have.
Because when I played
Yeah.
softball on,
On
apparently on
like
baseball.
church, I played them on like turf fields before.
Baseball has the grass in the middle.
But yeah,
Softball
baseball
diamonds
diamonds.
never do.
Oh, that's grass, softball is
Okay.
all good.
That's so, that's really.
I played softball for many
I
years.
said never
and
thought of that.
So apparently I had my eyes closed.
Yeah, you know, these are probably the
conversation's
right side of
making me
Because we're in man.
Okay, just curious.
It's not the right, I did you backwards.
I told Cindy that. I said, you know I'm not dead.
So
She was on the way home the other day. We laughed and laughed.
Wow,
Okay.
this is really cool.
I have spent years trying to simplify a training for life group leaders. And I have all this stuff in my arsenal because that's been there. We used to train for 3 days, so you're going to get it in about 8 minutes. But there are some basics, and walk through this with me for a minute, will you? Just turn the first page. I am really convinced, go back to the same point I made before, we must understand the reason we're doing life groups is because it's biblical. God has given us 50 one another's, love for one another, pray for one another, admit your sins to one another, care for one another. There are 50 of them, if you want to count them up in the New Testament. And that's what he's commanded us to do. Now, it's very difficult to do that if you don't know the people, you know. Doesn't mean you can't. But, and then you look at what Jesus did. I think it's fascinating that Jesus picked 12 people and that was his strategy. It just blows my mind. I just, you know, it's like, it's genius if the multiplication process happens. Acts 2:42 is a standard. Go to the second one. Again, we've said this before, this is about Jesus, it's about discipleship, it's about the gospel. We don't want to lose sight of that. And what we're looking for is that transformed heart. Now, let me just tell you, if you ever use this, don't just hand it to somebody. That's what we tend to do. We say, hey, here's a great tool, go read it. It's not that good. You've got to walk them through it. You've got to help do the whys. Why do you do this? What about this? Wow, that makes some sense, doesn't it? So I know that.
I have another comment on that. When she brought up Jethro principle, and everybody was like, yeah, what was that? What was that? You kind of knew that you knew, but you didn't really remember. Why do you think every life group leader should go through life group training every year?
Because we forget things.
I mean, like, because other stuff happens, or we get away from that and we focus on something else.
Right, or you get a different example
Yeah.
that when you go through a section again, you're like, oh, okay, now I have a different example for how that applies. So don't just think of these things when you're leading leaders as a one and off thing. These are also valuable to go over again and again and again and again. Because we all have a lot of things in our heads that tend to fall out of the file.
Baseball player. This is a relational tool, okay? Missional, worshipful, relational, missional. This is a relational part, okay? When people come into a life group, we must assume that they don't trust you and you probably don't trust them because you don't know them, right? And so it's a process. It just doesn't happen automatically, even with Christians. And so this is a tool that Lyman Coleman, who was a small group guru, came up with, and I really do think it's pretty genius. The first base, when you get somebody coming into your life group, it's really important just to have opportunity to get to know one another. So have each person unpack their story a little bit. You know, I grew up in Buffalo and I became a Christian when I was 8 years old, and I came out of this fundamental thing and it was top down, and man, I really rebelled against that, and you know, just a little bit of a story. And the winters were cold. I mean, we froze up there. This is like south compared to Buffalo. So you begin to tell just a little bit about your story. Everybody's got a story. And you unpack a little bit. And then when people unpack their story, there's a fear. Oh my gosh, I shared too much. They won't even like me. I'm just not that cool. And second base, which we don't do enough. So, story. This is, and these are explained in here, much better than I'm giving it to you here, is affirmation. Sounds funny, doesn't it? No, you've told your story. Guess what? I really like you. I really like you. These are the good things that I see. And it's amazing how quickly you can do that. I mean, I've seen people get in a group for 15 minutes and they can affirm each other in a very, very, very significant way. Very significant. These are the good things that I like about it. I see this gift in you. I can't remember what it was, but it was in the last week or two that somebody shared something, and it was like, wow, it was an affirmation. It was just powerful. And then, once we get around here, then we're feeling a little bit safer, right? Oh my gosh, I shared my story and they actually like me. This is cool. Then we can really begin to get into some more significant needs. Mike was saying at the break, he said, I don't like getting old. I like getting old. I've not shared this with many, but I've struggled. I don't feel old, but I'm getting old. And I think about the stuff you guys were talking about, you know. What would it be like? And what'll it mean? And, you know, I go down these paths because, you know, that you're there. I mean, you're talking about Social Security and you're talking about all this junk that old people talk about. We moved out of a neighborhood in Hilliard because all they were old people. We didn't feel old. Needs. Real needs.
I was talking to a life group leader the other day, and he was talking about his group, and he said, he's like, it's not how I want to see it. Like, we're not doing, it just doesn't feel the way I thought it would feel.
Yeah.
And so we were talking a little bit more, and one of the things that it comes down to is it hasn't had like the time. Like, and it hasn't had that sustained amount of time that it really requires to move through all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I told him, I was like, well, let's see. In the fall, there's choir. And so like half the group is gone for choir on Sunday nights when we meet. And, you know, like then there are just schedules and travel and there's that. They said, so you're looking at maybe like, 6 meetings sometime in the fall, and maybe half of those,
Yep.
you're not gonna have half your group.
Yep.
So now that we've made it to the new year,
Yep.
really there's no break until June at this point of like traditional life group meetings. I said, this is where like you could start investing a little bit into like, what's this gonna look like? Like what's this is gonna be a safe space now for people to come because it's regular.
Yeah.
Because the same people likely will be there week after week.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about that idea of it's a risk when there's somebody new who walks in the room and you're like, oh. And so we were explaining that. Now he's an extrovert and I'm an introvert, and so I was bringing this point to him. I said, listen, I said, I'm a person who I'm gonna need like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and moments of true vulnerability over and over before I'm even ready. Like everybody else has to share, you know, or like all these other people before we get to this point. But one thing that, you know, like he's just like, I know, but and I was like, stop, okay? Stop looking at, you know, like, this is the first year for this group. Right? So it started basically from scratch.
Yeah.
Like you are not a person who I have heard every good thing about this person and the way that he relates to people, the amount of people that he has brought to Vista or who know him at Vista. And he's like, yeah, but it's just not. And I was like, yeah, it's not your old group. Your old group was together for 4 years. Give it some time.
Yeah.
Some time and just go.
It does, it takes time. I learned this with Tim, because I was thinking about multiplying this group, and he goes, Gary, I don't even know these people yet. I need to figure out whether they're Christians or not. You know, and it was a good aha for me, like, slow down here. It takes time. The other thing that I've noticed is there are some groups that God engineers together that are the greatest groups in the world. And there are some groups that God engineers together that they're not really good at all. But God's got you there. They just don't gel like some other groups do, you know. But God's got you there, in the middle of it. The last space is, it's I'm not going to spell it because I don't know how, but it's called koinonia, which is real life community. You know, you get to a point where I think some of our life groups have really gotten to, where they meet each other's need. Somebody has a need. What do you need? What do you need? I got some. Where real life, and then you're beginning, and we've all been, I think, a part of a group where we always start with teaching the baseball diamonds saying, have you ever been in a group where you believe it's gotten as close to koinonia as you can get? What are the characteristics of that group? Anybody been in anything like that? What would be the characteristics? What would that look like?
There is like trust and vulnerability like you wouldn't believe. Unless you've been in that spot where you can walk in with anything on any given day. Whether it's when you're meeting in that life group or it's the middle of the night.
I think there's also risk in that group.
Yep.
Because you're even if you told your story, even if there's always risk in throwing it out.
trust, there's risk. Had a whole bunch of lists one time, and I said on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 7, how are we doing in prayer? How are we doing in koinonia? And they're going, what's koinonia? What do you think it is? You know, teaching all that. I had fun in there, in our life group. And the one that scored the highest, I was so excited, was safe. It's safe. I feel safe here. And I'm going, I mean, I had Bible study down, prayer down, you know, all the stuff. And that was a fascinating exercise, by the way. I didn't bring that. I have it if you ever were interested. But I had fun. I had Bible study. I had prayer. I had koinonia. I had all of these things. I said, okay, I scale. And then I took all the numbers and I averaged them out. And it was fascinating because one person had 1 as the lowest for prayer. Another person had 7 as the highest for prayer. Well, let's talk about that. What are your expectations? You know, it was fascinating. I was going to do it like for 20 minutes in the life group. We did it for 3 weeks. Literally just kind of tore that apart and said, what's going on here? And what are you doing with that expectation? You think prayer stinks in here. You know, how do we do that? How do we become one in all that with our expectations? Life groups are balanced. Relationship, Bible study, outreach, and missional. And we've got some timelines there that we put together. In our case, for curriculum, we use weekly messages and practically apply it to our lives.
So you're on distinctive 5?
I'm on 5 and I'm moving on to 6. Life groups are living missionally, individually. I would say one of the best tools that we've done in the last 3 years, I don't know, 2 years, is Blessed 10. It's probably the best. How you doing? And we need to keep going back to the well on that. I finally started praying for my 10 again because I was mad because none of them came to the Christmas thing. And then I got thinking yesterday. I was praying the other day in the staff meeting. I said, I am such a sinner. I am so screwed up. Because as I thought about it, I was mad that nobody came to the Christmas program. And I wasn't, when I started praying for them, I wouldn't even think of the Christmas program. I was just praying for them. And I'm going, why would I think they had to come to the Christmas program? Because I wasn't thinking that one. So I need to start praying again. I'm still doing something outside of the Christmas program. And why would I think they had to come for me? God's got a plan. Why am I putting myself back in the center of all that stupid stuff? And I said, God, I'm sorry. And so I started praying again. What is it, January, the end of January, what is it, February? The end of January, so I was 3 weeks and just was ticked out. Ticked right out.
We're all over the staff work.
7 is what's a facilitator? You know, lots of people come with the expectation, oh my gosh, we must have elders being the facilitators. I don't know Greek. I'm an introvert, I can't do it. That's all bogus. We're looking for people with heart. We're looking for people that are being transformed, that are faithful, that are teachable. That's my biggest one.
It needs to do that when we evaluated, like, who was going to be leaders in the ministry when I was in college. We used to say, are they fat?
They fat?
People would be like,
There you go. Yeah, thanks a lot.
like, no, let me bring that down for you. Well, we asked, that was one of the questions you'd sit down with, your staff person and I'd go, all right, who are the fat people in your group? You're like, oh, okay.
Let me remind you of one on 8 that people just don't pay attention to. And that is, people are committed to ideas they help create. There are a series of things that if you don't talk about them, people can quit. Like, when do we start? What are we going to do with child care? Let's not make the treat like a gourmet dinner, because you get to a point and you go, okay, I'm not playing. Not gonna do it.
Can't just bring it back and correct it.
It's exactly right.
Do you know why we say that?
To make it more than you.
Yeah. Or don't have your house always clean if you're the host?
Well, because if you're in that spot, then people think that they have to be there too.
Right, because you're never gonna multiply yourself.
It's not reproducible.
It's not reproducible. So be a little messy. You know, somebody says, oh, I can't host this because I can't make this huge meal every time, so I'm not gonna be a host for a life group. Well, that's not part of the expectation. You're making that part of an expectation that might lead to not being able to multiply in your group. It's just something to think about.
Try to make life group into a marginally enjoyable experience.
Marginally enjoyable.
Also, thinking through, if you say, we have no childcare, Tim and I had a huge debate about this. On the sign-up sheets or on the things for life groups, they said no childcare available. Okay, really, no childcare available? So that means if somebody joined your group and they needed childcare, like you could brainstorm a way to have childcare for that person? Well, now me as a new person, I'm skipping that whole group. That's what you want?
That was the objective, probably, for why they wrote that in.
And then how was that fit in with everything that Gary said?
Yeah.
Another big one is
The chair is
confidentiality.
open unless you have a child.
Hey, it's not a kid's chair.
Another big one, I mean, bigger than you think it is confidentiality. And you must talk about that. It's very hard to define. It doesn't mean you can't talk about the life group and the good things they're doing. But sometimes people will share. I'll give you an example. When I was 7, 8 years old, my very, very best friend was my mom. She was just, I just shared everything with her. Until one day, and I heard my mom sharing something that I considered confidential with my aunt, and I never shared with her for the rest of my life to that death, ever. And she knew it. We talked about it just before she died, and I said, Mom, she doesn't know. She knew exactly what I was talking about. And so that confidentiality thing can just cut. And so it is one of the things in ministry that's one of the hardest, because there's good stories to share, it's fun to share, but boy, if that's a confidential thing, you can just cream a person. Just cream them. So you really have to say, hey, this is confidential, I really don't want this to go outside of the group, because it's safe. Right? But it's not safe out there. Right? So it's something that really is a good thing to discuss. There's the Jethro principle. There you go, you guys. And then at the end, and you can read through these are just some really, really good tools that I've picked up about training, some practical helps, how to be led by the Spirit.
Where are you at?
Those are the last 3 or 4 pages there. Just very, very good practical tools. And very, very helpful. And then what's a life group leader? Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Really great. I want to, let me give you this one. We'll just do this real quick. This is something that I put together, actually I stole it, to be honest with you, from Carl George, and then I Vistaized it a little bit. And I would get together with life group leaders as a coach, maybe 3 times a year, because it's, it wasn't a lot, but I would get together with them, and every one of these times I would ask these questions. So, some life group systems, small group systems will, say we want a report. Nobody ever gave me a report, so I just thought, I'm just going to ask you questions, and I'm going to write your answers down. So they didn't have to write them, I just wrote them. And I did this in like 15 to 20 minutes max. And I know it was frustrating because some people wanted to talk more, but I was just collecting data because I wanted to catch what was going on as a tone. So I'll give you a highlight. I used to ask them, do they meet in their home or a host home? And then they might say, well, we meet in our home, and I say, why? Why? Well, because it works well for our kid. Okay, okay. But if you feel like you have to have it there, that's a problem. Because you don't, because your wife may go, I don't ever want to leave a life group again, because I don't want to have to host it again. How many apprentices do you have? Now, I'm driving something here, 2 Timothy 2:2. What about the child care arrangements? I was so pleased at Vista because everybody handled it well. They just figured it out, tried to figure out, they may bring somebody in, but they just, all the ones that I interviewed, they just nailed it, you know. It was all different, but they nailed it. How do you connect with people? How do you connect with your life group at church? Something, out in the lobby, some say we sit together. I just thought that was an interesting question to see if there was any kind of something in there. There are churches that actually put sections of churches together for life groups, and then they just minister to the section. And they just, you know, so we're up in the balcony and the whole section will be theirs.
Oh, I love that.
And they minister to each of the section. They sit there every week.
Oh, got it.
And then they just hear, and so they're like the connectors of the section.
Oh, absolutely.
Now I get it.
And so they're reaching out in the church to people, inviting them to life group or going out to dinner or whatever, because they see them every week. How do you put your visitor or newcomer at ease at a life group? And I'll tell you why I added this one, because I went to a life group and I was so uncomfortable I couldn't stand it. At Vista. Yep.
I'm sorry, me too.
Yeah. You have to remember, it's a risk to come to your life group that's been meeting for a year. And I don't know you people, and I don't know that you're going to ever hear my story or like me anyway. So it's a big, big risk. So how do you break those down? We used to do this at how to get kids to camp. I'd write down every opposition of why a kid couldn't come to camp. You don't like it. My parents, money, driver's ed, you know, and I put them all down. I said, okay, how do we knock these down? How do we get that kid to camp? Because I knew many of them met Jesus. And I'm going, okay, can you do driver's ed in June instead of August? Jeez, I never thought of that. Can I talk to your parents? Sure. I can help you with the money. So you just knock it down. Same thing. How do you knock those things down? I'd love to have you come to our life group. This is a good one. What are the good things that have happened to your people in your life group? I get the funniest look on people's faces like, all right, let me put it another way. What is God doing in your life group? You'll go, well, we did pray that Jody would get a job, and she got a job. Well, that's pretty good, isn't it? Way to go, God! We don't sometimes give God credit for the stuff that we actually prayed for. And almost every time, once we got the pump going, you're going, this happened, this happened, this happened. This happened. And I'm going, this is super. But boy, I'll tell you, I got some funny looks at the beginning of that. I always ask about the Vista values on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you do worship with? And it's fascinating because they go, well, we really don't sing in the life group. That's how you define it. Then you get into more. You know, we do have a good prayer time. And then relationally, most of our Vista people relationally, they're going, yeah, we do really.
Yeah, we got that.
And then you go missionally. Well, we did a dinner Thanksgiving, and we did a reach out at Christmas. So the principle is, it's an event, not necessarily a lifestyle. And again, we're coaching, right? So we're just kind of throwing out. I was so pleased because the first year I did this, and then the next year I did it, I saw tremendous growth. So the other question that I always ask is identifying the talents and spiritual gifts of the people. Because most of the time when I see a stressed out life group leader, and I see it every once in a while. They're doing it all. They're doing all the pastoral care. They're having it at their house. They're leading, and they're like, I'm pooped. I said, I'd be pooped too. Why do you have to do all that? How about the, you know, I'd be down with that. So I like that little tool. All right, I want to take two other situations, I think. What do you think is the hardest thing that a life group has to do? Or that we ask the life group to do? And they don't do it usually. Yep. Yep. It's multiplication. I remember, I think it was Tim initially was not have to try on this, and then he really saw the value, and I remember he worked with the seeds, and they were fighting tooth and nail. They were just, we're not multiplying, we're just getting to know you.
It was just horrible.
And
Just
then,
gut-wrenching emotional. They're sobbing, they're sitting at our kitchen table just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, and we're like, holy moly.
It's gotta go deeper than multiplication.
Yeah, and there was a lot of different things in there,
and then I remember doing a training with Jess C.
Right.
And she said, we hated this. This was one of the best things we ever did. Because they had multiplied like 2 or 3 times. Now,
Right, and eventually then they went to a church plant team, and then they went to another church. And they're living it out loud, proud now, man.
let me make a statement. I believe that God's heart hurts, is in pain for the people who don't have biblical community in this life. And I don't know if we care. Now, I've shared that before, and that little guilt thing doesn't move anybody, but it's an interesting thought.
It's good delivery though. It's a privacy.
There's at least 50%. And this was maybe 2-3 years ago at Dublin. They don't even know what we're talking about. And we're sitting around going, God's moving, and people are getting ministered to, and needs are getting taken care of, and oh yeah, you don't have that. Because the assumption is that when we put people in biblical community, they said, we've never tasted this before. We have never had friends like this. We have never. You think about Acts 2, and it said that they added to their number daily. I think about this all the time. Was it just the Holy Spirit, or was that such a powerful group that they went, I gotta get in there. What's going on over there? But I could see God really hurting. Like he hurts for the, there's no biblical community in so many of our people's lives. They don't have a clue what we're talking about. And it may be just as simple as, how did we all get in? We got invited. We got personally invited. It wasn't an announcement. It was a personal invitation. So here's a couple tools. Again, I beat this for 30 years. I'm going to keep beating it till I die.
That's going to be a long, long, long time ago.
Not according to Brian.
Long.
Let me give you a couple tools on this one. And I believe these are really good. When you ask people, they say, how do you multiply? My first thing is, go as fast as you can on your knees. If I can get people praying about it, that's the biggest thing. Are you open? I know all the deals. We're building relationships, and my wife loves the group, or my husband loves the group. I get all that. And maybe it shouldn't. But if you're praying about it, at least you're open, right? I remember one time, and this is the second one, I talk about multiplication almost at every meeting or every other meeting. I say, okay, what is God saying to you about multiplication? And they look down. Because they're not praying about it. And they're looking down and say, okay, I just asked. I did that for 2 years. I remember one guy said, God told me to lead a group, and I went, really? Really? And so we multiplied, and we went with him, Kim and I went with him. But it's like if we're open to praying and saying, God, what do you want to do with this group? And maybe there are people, and there's no prescription on it. Sometimes I've left the group. Somebody asked the other day, are you still in Tim Clark's group? I said, no, I left for a reason. They're going to be a whole lot better with me out of the way. And they multiply already. Because I would be a bugaboo, because they're going, well, Gary leads are really good. Who else? You know what I'm saying? So, talk about it. What does God want us to do? What does God tell us to do? There's a way to multiply, and that is to subgroup it, and that's very natural. How about 2 or 3 get over here, 2 or 3 go over here, and take the prayer time this way? Or how about, here's a couple questions for you two, and let's come back up together and talk. And you begin to watch around the group, and you can tell who the leaders are. You can tell who can really facilitate a good group. You can tell who is it. You can tell that too. Honor a slow separation. I'm going to read all these. So an apprentice may leave and start a new group. There may be potential leaders that are going to go start. A new cell may be formed. Here's another biggie, the very last one. Honor the core groups. Let's say that Cindy and Kim and Tim and I are in a group, and we're like best friends. And it just is a real natural. You don't have to bust that. You don't have to oh my gosh, no, you got it. No. See what God's trying to say, because that may be something. You see what I'm saying? Okay. That's a really big one. This is very tied into it, and I want to just give an illustration on this. Is how do we draw people? I want one of those. How do we draw people to our groups? And this will be the last. This plays off the open chair or the empty chair, and you know what that is. You pull up a chair and you say, hey God, why don't you fill it? Why don't you change us? Why don't you see what, and you put a non-Christian in your group, it's going to change you. No, it's going to change you. It is. Because they're going to ask obvious questions that you're going, I had a non-Christian in the group, and he was all ticked off about somebody had hurt a 2-year-old kid and killed him, and why does God allow suffering? And so we started asking that question. I sent him home and told him to go figure it out. Well, the best answers came from the non-believers. The Christians really didn't know what they were talking about. So it'll change you. It's a constant reminder that we're open to others. At Vista, everybody's a greeter. Everybody's a connector. Everybody is. How do you prepare yourself before you walk in on Sunday morning? How do you prepare your heart? As opposed to, might better be good this week. Oh, that worship was good, or, yeah, it wasn't that good. What's God doing in your heart to make you a connector? To make you a greeter? The power of personal invitation, as this is Vista, we're relationally oriented. Now, there are fishing ponds. And what I mean by that, there are mid-size groups. So we've got a large group, which is Sunday morning. And then we got down here, we got a bunch of small groups, life groups, other groups, biblical community groups. And we're really trying to take these people and put them down here. And I worked for a pastor, he said, if you're just coming on Sunday morning, you don't have a clue what this church is about. Because it's temple courts, and how's the house? And then you have these other groups. And I just want to give you one example. The best large group, this is the largest, say this is 600 in Dublin, and we've got about 150 in one of the groups here, and let's say these are 10. The best fishing pond at Vista, in my estimation, is the choir. It's the best. We have people who are unconnected to the choir. Now they're connected to Tammy, or they're connected to the, you know. This is how Mary Clark got her life group. She fished like between 20 and 30 people out of the choir. Hey, would you like to come to our life? Oh, what's your name? Oh, Joshua. I mean, we used to meet with them, and there were 4 of us. And then she filled it to 30. So, we're literally, if we think that we are all connectors, how do we meet this person and take them to the next place? Now, that may be a life group, it may not. It may be a serving opportunity. It may be a dinner. It may be you want to know more about Vista? I'll take you through the playbook. But we're always connecting. We look at events as end in themselves. The choir's not an end in itself. We didn't quit in December. It's a means for transformational honor.
Right, and we're trying to meet with as many leaders as we can, many groups as we can. And Ann Michelle will tell you, as she's been talking through the table, I've been pushing this on her to death about this fishing pond. We're calling them on-ramps.
Mm-hmm, on-ramps.
How do you get from that event, what is the table doing in their organization to on-ramp women from Vista into Vista groups, or Vista ministry groups, or Vista one-on-one, and Jan is connecting part of that also. When Lonnie and the women at Hilliard talked about the T, we talked about what are going to be the on-ramps. Melinda's doing that with each site in kids' community, whether you're having a parents' night out. Now, how is that an on-ramp to becoming more involved? Because the reason we have events is not to have events. The reason we have events is to on-ramp people, to bring connection personally and into groups.
Does that make sense? I mean, that is it. That's how we do it in Vista. 2 other quick tools. I ran into this, and maybe something you would like. I only have 1 copy, but you can look at it. Small Group Emergency Respond Handbook. So this particular person has a need. I read it for Tim Clark, who was dying of cancer, and I just read it, and there were a couple little tools. Here's what you talk about. Here would be a good thing not to talk about, just to kind of get your head going. It's not an end in itself. The other thing that I have shared with some people is we put questions together for life groups. This is called the Lesson Maker. I wish I could say it did the whole Bible. This particular book is just the New Testament. There is a software program that can do the whole Bible, which means that every passage of Scripture, they will put together open questions, explore questions, get it questions, and apply it questions. So when I was leading Tim Clark's life group, I'd read the questions, and 9.9 times out of 10 I go, these are good questions, perfect. One time I read it and I went, this doesn't fit our group. So I went to this, and I started, and I don't use them all, I just pick the ones that I like. So there are tools that can help you to put questions together. My daughter-in-law figured out I had this. She calls me about every other day for another book in the Old Testament so I can give her questions.
Hey, Gary, I was researching Lesson Maker 8 when you have that one flyer.
Yeah.
Because you should be able to just download it. And as far as I got was, it's now owned by Lifeway, and there's like a company, wordsearch.com, something like that, and that's like the parent company. And you can find Lesson Maker 8 there to download for $49.95. But then they say you have to have the word search to work with it. So they try to sell you the latest version, which is like 11, so then you just spend the $200. But there's a free download of it, and they should work together. I was trying to message them.
You can talk to Jan on that, and she can.
I haven't tried it yet.
Would you put that information on the group?
Yeah, I can. I was just kind of chatting with them, trying to make sure it would work together, so I just had to put it all together.
Hey, I'm a Trentine person. Let me close in prayer. Father, we love you. We are grateful that you're here. We pray that you will continually change our heart, change our mind. Whatever that means, and that's a scary prayer, God. But I do pray that you'll change us and mold us more into the individuals, into the VLR group, and into the church of Vista that you want us to be. We love you, but most of all, we thank you for loving us. In Jesus' name, amen.